Nicholas locked himself in his room. It was very hard on his soul, but no one had ever told him that his life would be trouble-free and easy. He took off his glasses and wiped away his tears. How much hard labor, and had stolen goods ever brought anyone happiness, he said aloud when will mankind realize that this is not the way to do things. A month ago, a 62-year-old scientist was left on the street. He was not kicked out of the office, of course, but his invention, to which he had devoted almost 25 years, was unceremoniously appropriated by the superintendent. What did I want? Wasn't that the way it used to be? Who among true scientists could boast that his labor was appreciated? Smith, perhaps. The pain was tearing his heart, somewhere inside. Nicholas himself realized that his invention was priceless, and it was very easy to take it away on some pretext, and he wasn't connected to the police or any other authorities. Okay, that could be explained somehow. But after they confiscated his car and all the documents, a week later, rumors began to spread that, say, the superintendent began to draw up documents for the patent of the very installation, which so many years collected Nicholas. He had never been an entrepreneur or businessman. He was driven by pure altruism, faith in people, a desire for a better future. But very quickly he realized that not everyone lives like that most people live only for today. They don't care about their children and the next generation. A month later, the head of the once promising laboratory walked around very proud, and it was already openly said that he filed for a patent on Swan's machine. Nicholas couldn't take it anymore and quit immediately. "Daddy," his daughter knocked on his door. "Are you all right?" she asked excitedly. "Yes, everything is fine," he tried to speak so that his voice did not tremble. The daughter sighed, returned to the kitchen. No one like her knew how much her father cared about what he was doing. The girl had been born with some problems. She had a slight developmental delay. One leg was weaker. Of course, this did not affect her mental abilities in any way, but she never managed to make friends, let alone get married. She worked part-time writing articles for online publications. She had a third job group, but Emily didn't go to the office. She wouldn't have been hired elsewhere. The girl didn't move that fast. Her father dreamed that he would receive money for the patent, and they would finally make repairs in the apartment. Now there would be no pension supplement. In fact, he was promised to raise it for his contribution to science. But now these finances will also be presented to the salary of the 55-year-old superintendent. Emily was worried sick about her father. He was the only person close to her. She was pretty good at science, too. Nicholas often sat next to his daughter and reasoned. So from childhood, a girl got used to thinking rationally and logically. Unfortunately, at the age of 12, her mother died. Nicholas was so absorbed in science that he did not even think of getting married a second time. "We should eat something," Nicholas whispered. He had gotten very thin over the month. Finally, he left his room, which served as his study. He headed for the kitchen, from which pleasant smells were wafting. "Papa," Emily came up to him. "Let's have tea. The apple pie is almost cold."
"It smells delicious," he smiled. "I need something to do or I'm going to go crazy."
"Daddy, you've worked so many years. Just rest," she begged him. But they promised to give me more work. If I were a photographer, of course I'd get a lot more. "What are you writing about now?" Father asked. "Is it about the forest again?" "No, I have a few articles about deserts now," she smiled. "You know, I could make a lot more money if I wrote about cosmetics and stupid relationships. But I can't," she sighed. "It's not real." "I understand." Dad said, when I first said that Einstein was a genius, but he was wrong not to go ahead. I almost got blown to smithereens. Of course, there were always those who disliked him, but I always admired him. Even now that I've been able to put his theoretical laws into practice, he was always there for me. None of the physicists helped me as much as he did, even though he and I had never met in person. But it was like I could feel what he was saying and what he was doubting. So take the road that you feel is yours. And don't think about money. Don't compare being paid less for your woods than a story of betrayal. "Dad, do you have to go on too?" seriously replied the daughter. "Any topic can be looked at from different angles. So look at yours from the one from which you have yet seen it." So Nicholas realized that Emily was right. How many times he wanted to grab his old notebook again, sit down to calculate. but it was either fear or resentment that kept him from doing so. The man could be called an intellectual in the true sense. He never wished harm to anyone. The only goal of his life was to create a better future for the next generation. That's what he lived for. And now it's all been destroyed. What would happen to his installation? He didn't know. So perhaps it would have gone on like this for the rest of his life. But there was an unpleasant event that shook him up. "Doctor, I will do everything in my power." Nicholas looked at the doctor. "Please help her. And she has a long treatment ahead of her. I can tell you one thing. Prepare a lot of money. But it won't go away on its own for sure," the doctor answered him. Nicholas sat beside his daughter, squeezed her hand tightly and cried.
"Dad, come on," Anastasia said with pale lips. "Everything will be all right. I'm going to be all right."
"Of course you will," he stroked Emily's head. "My girl, I'm so sorry I didn't spend more time with you." That day, Nicholas's heart ached constantly. He couldn't lose his daughter. Something inside overpowered. So he grabbed his notebook, started writing something, then drawing. Long formulas, calculations came again. "Look on the bright side," he mumbled. "Which side?" "I don't understand." He tossed the notebook aside and clutched his head. "God, what do you want me to do? I've done everything I can. I invented this machine that was supposed to revolutionize quantum mechanics. And what? It's just taken away. Was it my fault?" Nicholas realized what huge prospects would have opened up, not only for physics, but also, for example, for the computer industry. After all, his machine made it clear that computing could be accelerated by a factor of 20,000. This could turn the Earth into a paradise in an instant. How many people could be saved by performing hitherto impossible operations, exploring the deep layers of the Earth and preventing earthquakes? Nicholas' head was exploding because what he had invented was completely changing the future. Sure, it was all in the bud, but it was a foundation on which to build a happy life. "Right now, I only have one person to save, my daughter," he said dryly. "I'm not interested in the rest." Nicholas went online and looked up the prices of the drugs he needed to buy for Emily. Oh my God, he paled. One ampoule was 180,000. It was a real blow. Now his daughter needed 5 shots, then 2 more for 2 months straight, then alternate, and so on for a whole year. Nicholas realized he needed to get back to reality. To hell with science. He needed to find some kind of job. Emily could die. He reached into the classifeeds, swiftly driving his eyes around. His brain was boiling, so he couldn't concentrate. "God, I can't do anything but science," he cried. "Maybe I could become a tutor." But Nicholas didn't understand the school program at all. Besides, he'd never taught. He was a performer, not a teacher. Almost 3 days passed like hell for him. He collected all the money, sold some old furniture and valuable books for 3 ampoules. That was enough money, but he needed at least 2 more. Nicholas clenched his hands into fists and went to a very unpleasant meeting. He looked at the former superintendent in horror. "So how are you resting in retirement?" "Not bad. Do you sleep well at night? They stole my invention, filed a patent on it." Nicholas had nothing to lose. "I need the money. My daughter's seriously ill. At least give me half of it." "Get out of here," swore at the superintendent, "otherwise I'll make sure you go to jail. You're the one who stole my designs. It's good that I realized it in time." "And scoundrel." Nicholas clung to him. "My daughter could die." "You're an idiot. You're stupid. You don't know anything about science." Finally, the guest managed to tear away from the head. He was scared out of his wits. As you know, all scoundrels are actually very cowardly. Nicholas returned home angry. He now didn't know exactly where he would get the money from. On his way home, he bought a newspaper. There were a couple of ads. From despair, the man began to read them. "A watchman is needed at the cemetery," he sighed. "From 2 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon." Nicholas thought about it. He had to start somewhere anyway. It didn't scare him at all that it was a cemetery. "To hell with you. I'll guard the dead," he shouted to someone. "Choke on it, you bastard," he swore at the former manager. "Stolen goods won't do you any good anyway." Nicholas agreed that from tonight he would start work, but that was not the most important thing. The man urgently needed to borrow money for 2 more ampoules. After all, a few acquaintances had already transferred some of it to him, as much as they could. So Emily, at least, would survive. Nicholas opened the bag. He threw some books in it, 2 notebooks, a notebook, then put his daughter's groceries in another bag and went to the hospital. And from there, immediately he planned to drive to work. Because it was very difficult to find a cemetery watchman, the pay was not bad. They were offering $18,000 for 15 nights. And that was a lot of money for Nicholas's budget right now. The director of the cemetery told him everything, showed him cameras were installed all over the cemetery. So if anything happened, he could call the police right away. Basically, it's quiet here, the director grinned. Every now and then some sectarians gather to perform their rituals. There have only been a couple of grave robberies, but otherwise it's been uneventful. Nicholas set up his workstation. Most importantly, he had a desk. He opened a book, started reading something. Then, one by one, notes began to appear in his notebook. When Nicholas finished writing, he did not remember. The man opened his eyes. His head was lying on the book. Where am I? He was afraid. It had already dawned outside. Oh, that's right. I'm at the cemetery. In 2 hours, the janitor would be here. Nicholas didn't even look at what was in his notebook. He stuffed everything in his bag and went outside. God, how fleeting our lives are, he sighed. Can't people live for 70 years? Honestly, surely some of them had stolen, killed, raped. And he looked around. The cemetery seemed endless. How many of those who lay here had lived by the law? Is it possible to take anything to the afterlife? Then why not be a good man? After all, the earth equalizes everyone. Nicholas philosophized for a while. To his surprise, the cemetery didn't scare him. We need to find some work for the day, he said aloud. It won't be enough. And with these thoughts, he returned home. He ate a quick breakfast and started to look at the advertisements. No, a janitor won't do. You have to work there early in the morning. He looked at the job offers. Dog walking. Jesus, there's even that. Why get a dog if you can't take care of it? He scratched his head. Nicholas couldn't find anything suitable, and he felt cold again. Let the bastard kill me, he shouted. And then he'd go to jail. At least he'd have some redemption for his theft. Swan headed for the lab again. This time he threatened to sue. The supervisor got him out of there somehow. This is the last time I'm warning you. If you come back again, you're dead, the director threatened him. We'll see about that. I won't leave you alone, Nicholas threatened him with his fist. In fact, the headmaster did not expect such a boldness from his employee, and neither did he. But his daughter's life was at stake, so for that he could risk it. Nicholas went into Emily's room. She was looking better. Her father had specifically asked the doctor not to tell her about the expensive medication. I got a job, he smiled. Daughter, I promise you, everything will be all right. Dad, I'm terrified, she looked at her father. But this is a cemetery. Aren't you scared? No, they're dead, he laughed. Why be afraid of them? You should be afraid of the living. They're the ones who can do harm. He sighed, remembering the head of the laboratory. The doctor told the man that Emily would be discharged in a week. The crisis had passed. She now needed constant treatment. In addition to the medicine he had already gotten, there were many more pills needed. Okay, I'll get them all, he promised. Nicholas realized that in his position it was difficult, harder than he thought. Of course, Emily would continue to work, but her pension and the money she was earning would barely be enough for food. But for medical treatment, almost a week went by like that. Nicholas started working part-time at the market as a loader. The money was paid right away, so after the cemetery, he went straight there. He didn't get much sleep because he was doing science again at night. That's what he was all about. That's what motivated his life. Emily was adamantly against it, but her father hinted to her that she was serious. Am I going to die? The girl was terrified. Dad, don't be silent. Tell me the truth. No, but you need treatment, Emily. We need a lot of money for that, answered the father. Emily realized that she would no longer be able to get a job at the store or any other place related to traffic. She decided to take every article that was offered to her. But even that didn't save her. As a copywriter, she wasn't getting paid much. And so Nicholas made up his mind. He filed a police report about the theft of his invention. It was a cold fall morning when he went to the market. The clock read about 8 o'clock. Suddenly someone approached the man from behind and held something to his back. Don't move, the man's voice wheezed. This is your last warning. If you don't take your statement from the police, I'll kill you and your daughter." "The bastard sent you." Nicholas wanted to turn around sharply, but something tore his cloak and stabbed him in the back. "And you will close this case tonight. Do you understand me?" The man felt himself being pushed, and he flew into the grass. Books spilled out of the bag. Nicholas only saw someone turn the corner. Who was it? He didn't know. He quickly gathered his things, but as he fell, his cell phone fell out of his coat pocket and flew aside. And Nicholas didn't see it coming. With curses, he headed for the market. He had work to do. Why isn't he answering? Emily worried. Maybe he's gotten sick. Little things, he works at the cemetery after all. And she didn't wait any longer. She got dressed, called a cab, and in about 40 minutes she entered the gate of the cemetery and headed towards the gatehouse. The janitor and the janitor in one person usually sat there during the day. "Good afternoon," she opened the door, but there was no one inside. "Where are you? Or was it hard to walk far?" Emily asked. There were some funeral services in the cemetery. The girl decided to look in there too, and it was empty. "Hey, is anyone here?" she shouted. The shout echoed and Emily shuddered. She was about to leave when some rustling sound came from the far corner. The girl's heart raced, but she made her way there. There was a coffin lying unnoticed at the very end, because there were some things hanging in front of it and other coffins standing in front of it. Emily could obviously hear a noise coming from it. She herself didn't know how, but she managed to open the lid. It was strange. Coffins didn't usually have locks. In the coffin was a bound man, a gag in his mouth. Emily shrieked and bounced away. The man was twitching his body and wanted to say something to her, but there were voices, and she closed the lid again. "Excuse me," she approached the salesman. "How much does one of these cost?" Her voice trembled. Emily's whole body was shaking. "What are you doing here?" the owner asked her. There were 2 other men standing around him. The woman fixed her eyes on them. "I came in. There was no one here. I wanted to choose," she stammered, dizzy. "But what are you doing here?" "I'm going to call the police," the owner threatened. "When I'm not here, you have to wait outside." "I'm sorry, but I didn't know where you were," Emily excused herself. "I'm sorry again," she said and ran outside. Emily didn't know what to do. Her father was missing. She had apparently learned someone else's terrible secret. She called a cab, went to the market, and found her father. He told her he'd lost his cell phone somewhere. Nicholas didn't want Emily to know he was being threatened. "Dad, I need to tell you something," she cried. "Come home soon." Nicholas was getting worried. Emily shouldn't be nervous at all right now. An hour later, he finished and went back to where he'd fallen. But the phone was gone. "Dad," her daughter cried, "I'm so worried that you didn't answer. I went to the cemetery and there." "What happened there?" He hugged her. "Did someone hurt you there?" "Well, tell me." "Dad, I went to the funeral parlor, and there was a live person in a coffin," she finally said. "How so?" Nicholas turned pale. "Emily, are you sure?" He scratched his head. Yes, the coffin was locked. The man's hands and feet were bound and he couldn't break free. He couldn't scream either. His mouth was gagged with something, she sobbed. "Dad, what's going on in there? Are they burying living people?" "I don't know," Nicholas shrugged. "Let's see if the owner of the service doesn't know anything. Well, maybe this coffin was planted on him." It was 5:30. Nicholas was leaving for work at 7. They had dinner. "Dad, take me with you," begged his daughter. "I'm afraid for you. Maybe there are some gangsters out there." "So everything will be all right," he smiled, though he wasn't sure of it. He pulled out his cell phone. He didn't care about smartphones right now. That evening, Nicholas didn't take anything with him, only cookies for tea. He had a bad feeling about it. The funeral service agency did various jobs. It was organized by one family. It was safe to say it was their empire. They were making $1 million on death. Nicholas headed over there. The owner was bustling with customers. He had a few words with the guard. "Okay, have a good night. I'll go to work." He smiled and headed for his gatehouse. The man saw the owner come out with the visitors and went to some grave. Nicholas quickly ducked into the hall, immediately finding that coffin Emily had told him about. But everything was quiet there. He was about to leave the room when some people entered and headed that way. Nicholas was terrified. He managed to hide behind the coffin. "He's sleeping now," he said. "During the night, he will be given medicine to stop his heart. Could you bury him tomorrow at lunchtime? Please make sure it's done properly. We don't have much time," said a woman's voice. "If necessary, I'll pay you." Nicholas froze. He had to summon all his willpower to move. A man's murder was being plotted. And from what he'd observed, the owner of this unremarkable establishment was providing such services. He tried to stand up, finally succeeding, but suddenly the lights went out everywhere. Then someone closed the door. "No," Nicholas thought, "I'll have to sleep here now." He fumbled in his pockets and came to an even greater fury. Distractedness was his problem. He left his cell phone on the table. "Shit, what the hell is a stretch?" he lamented. "Life never taught me anything." Nicholas didn't notice how he fell asleep. He had good dreams, so he didn't think about waking up. Andrew got a call from the master to the assistant. "Are you drinking again? I told you to finish your business first." "Yes, I'm completely sober," the man replied with a slurred tongue. Naturally, the director, the owner of the ritual services, would never set himself up. So he had one debtor for dirty work. In the afternoon, he injected sleeping pills into someone who'd been ordered by a rich woman. True, Eddie didn't know that Andrew had overdone it and injected a double dose. But the main thing is that the one in the coffin is asleep, and the rest doesn't matter. "And quickly cab and finish the job," ordered the owner. "I left everything on the table in the back room. Call me as soon as you're done. Yeah, you'll probably get noticed. The watchman will say you're here to see me, and he should have been warned that we get nighttime visitors from time to fit in." "You got it." The ex-paratrooper put his hand to his temple. "Eddie, you can count on me." Andrew hummed something. He'd almost drained the bottle. The case guaranteed him some money and a whole case of vodka. The chief had promised, and he always kept his promises. "After this, I'll go on a bender for a week," Andrew dreamed. That would be fun. Richie got dressed. The cab was already waiting for him on the street. On the way, Andrew even managed to fall asleep. And woke him up the driver near the cemetery. "Why are you here?" He looked at Andrew in horror. "Are you going to the other world?" "I think there's a guard here." "Throw, it's all right," patted him on the shoulder Andrew. "It's my mother's birthday today. The guard promised to take me to her. I've been working all day, I didn't have time." "Well, and workers," laughed the man. "All right, come on. Don't let the ghosts scare you here." "Yes, I'll ram them into a ram's horn." Andrew raised one hand. "Let them try." The cab driver left, and Andrew knew where he had to go. He carefully took a couple of iron bars and walked into the territory of the cemetery. The gatehouse. No lights were on, which meant the watchman was asleep. All the better. Andrew carefully opened the door, quietly turned on the light, since there was not a single window in the room. "Well, shall we begin?" Andrew sang loudly. His voice echoed off the coffins. Nicholas opened his eyes abruptly. He immediately remembered what had happened to him. In fact, he wanted to jump out of the building, but something was telling him not to leave the man who lay in the coffin. In the dark, Nicholas was afraid to open the coffin lest he have a heart attack. Andrew was singing merrily. He went into the back room. There on the table lay everything he needed. He quickly drew some substance from a vial into a syringe and headed for the place. Nicholas watched as he opened the coffin. There was some man lying there. "Well, hero, welcome to the other world," he laughed. Andrew swung, but someone in the air intercepted his arm. "Don't you dare," Nicholas shouted. "What are you doing? Leave him alone." "Hey, who are you?" Andrew recoiled in horror. "Andrew, what are you doing here?" One of his hands closed the coffin with a swing. Nicholas had never fought in his life, unless as a child, but at that moment some kind of power swept over him. "Well, I'll show you," the ex-paratrooper roared, something he still remembered. He swung the syringe in his hand. Nicholas felt the pain. Andrew began to press down on the plunger. Some amount of poison entered his bloodstream. The scientist grabbed something and hit the agent on the head with all his might. The man immediately fell unconscious. Nicholas pulled out the syringe and tossed it aside. It landed neatly in some sort of rag box. Nicholas immediately tied Andrew's hands and feet together. He saw that there was some sort of recess behind the coffins, and some rolls of material were stored there. The man threw the bandit there. In an instant, Nicholas felt sick and dizzy. He grabbed the rolls and pulled them behind him, fell, and several tens of kilograms of matter came down on him. In general, both Andrew and himself were buried under a pile of fabric. God, what a nice day, Riley stretched. I guess this must be the Golden Fall. The man got off his desk chair and looked out the window. He didn't feel like working. It wasn't often he could afford it. But that day his soul really sang. Let's go somewhere, he called his wife. I'd love to go for a walk. I can't right now, her voice sounded strange. I'm sorry, but I have an important meeting. It's all right, he sighed. I'll see you tonight. He said goodbye to his wife. The man went back to work. He had a big company and business was going well. 3 years ago, he bought his wife a beauty parlor. Carla ran it, but he was the official owner. They'd agreed that once things got going, Riley would sign the salon over to her. Truth be told, compared to the man's business, the salon was something completely insignificant, but it wasn't as simple as it seemed at first glance. Still, Riley left the office early that day. He walked through the park and thought about how his life had turned out. He wished he could say he was happy. Big money, good living conditions, a beautiful wife. What else could he dream of? To his horror, the man found that he wanted to give up everything and know the joy of simple things. How often he had dreamed of him and Carla riding bikes together on weekends, shopping and generally spending time together. But she was always busy. Her husband often even joked about it. Carla, I have almost 200 people working in my company, and you have 5. And you work harder than I do. But it's not my fault that I'm so responsible, she joked. I need everything to be perfect. So often it seems like if I had this or that, then I wouldn't have any trouble. But Riley knew from experience that money doesn't solve problems. After all, the latter is somehow born in our heads. People with money don't stop getting sick, much less dying. So their whole life revolves around the same problems as an ordinary person. You could say that nothing changes, although money can spoil a person. O'Reilly had observed this more than once. Of course, he was afraid of losing his company too, but his fears didn't go to extremes. I want children, the man whispered. How long can we wait? He thought about the most painful topic. Carla was adamantly reluctant to give birth. When Riley had tried to talk to her about it, she said she had a right to. Not every woman should become a mother. Of course, her husband didn't force her to, although a child can only come from love. I thought maybe there was something wrong with their feelings. Digging into herself wasn't working. Although Riley decided for himself that he needed to think about what he really wanted. So the man bought a bouquet of flowers and headed home. He liked paying attention to Carla. He kissed her. I'm so glad you're home. Let's have a candlelight dinner. I can't do that. She grabbed her purse. I've been waiting to see you. There was scandal at the salon today, but a client made a scene. We need to go down there and get to the bottom of it. Do you need help? Her husband asked her right away. Carla, I can come with you. She thanked but declined. Riley sighed and put the flowers in the vase. Something's going wrong, he whispered. It feels like some kind of storm is coming. With that not-so-good feeling, he went to his room. He didn't want to think about anything, so Riley turned on some movie. He fell asleep that day. He didn't hear his wife come home. Sometimes they slept in separate rooms. It wasn't unusual. Carla wasn't in the parlor at the time. Or rather, she stopped by to check that the missus was there. Then she got on the highway and headed for a village. There, just before she reached it, there was a cottage village. That's where Carla's car turned. The car entered a covered yard. The gate closed immediately. There were no dackets nearby, so no one saw any lights. A handsome man hugged her. How I missed you. And he began to kiss his guest passionately. To everyone who had ever seen Andrew, he was Carla's cousin. And even Riley had met him a few times. The man was also aware that his sister had helped buy him a house in the summer houses. So from the outside, there was nothing contradictory in the whole story. Met lovers almost 5 years ago. The romance broke out lightning fast and burned all these years with an even flame. Carla was sure that she loved Andrew. At its core, it was nothing new. Andrew had come to town for the good life, and he didn't care what the cost was to get it. He danced at a strip club. The handsome, pumped-up young man drove many women crazy. But Andrew knew his own price. He was not interested in inexperienced girls with their problems. He immediately tuned in to an independent woman. The age difference was not that great. Carla had recently turned 33, when Andrew was 25 at the time of their first meeting. Many people don't quite understand the mindset of a rich man. Many people are exactly why they want to have a lot of money, so they can try everything that is out of reach for the average person. It's like a game. Rich wives play too. They get bored with having everything. And since money has always been an end in itself for them, it has defined their lives. It was the penniless scientist Nicholas who was trying for all mankind, but people like his superintendent Carla and her lover didn't care. Their thinking was so narrow that it revolved only around themselves. Lately, Riley had begun to wonder about that too. He even thought of starting a charitable foundation, but his wife had talked him out of it. Andrew grabbed his guest in his arms and carried her into the bedroom. He had a fancy house. Andrew made a very good living stripping, but as they say, appetite comes at mealtime. It seemed to the guy that he deserved more. That's how one plan came into his head. Things were going so well with Carla, so it was possible to take a risk for riches. The young man was willing to take some risks. An hour later, the lovers were discussing their business. 3 years ago, they had approved their plan. It was so dangerous that every step had to be calculated. Carla didn't register the beauty parlor so that she wouldn't be suspected later. In fact, she was trying to be very careful. She and Riley went on vacations from time to time, went to restaurants. So from the outside, you could say they were a normal couple. And then came a very exciting time. The lovers were preparing the final stage of their plan, but before Riley could be taken out, everything had to be in place. "What about the doctor?" Andrew asked Carla. "He's definitely reliable. Should we offer him more money?" "He's fine," she smiled. "Andrew, how much more?" "He'll just have to testify that Riley died of cardiac arrest. It's not like he's going to kill him." It was all so easy in Carla's mind. The woman didn't quite realize that no matter how much you paid, if it came to your own safety, the man would turn everyone in. How many times have crooks and con artists like this made the same mistakes? And the outcome is always the same. Those whom they once paid for the sake of their freedom told everything, even what really did not happen. If a man is willing to do something against another man, why can't he do something against you? After all, it's that simple. But unfortunately, some wealthy people who consider themselves the greats of this world are somehow sure that it does not apply to them. To let it happen to others, but it won't affect them. That's how Carla was sure that the truth was on her side, that she could pay someone money and sleep well. Good, Andrew was satisfied with her answer. What about the funeral home? Have you talked to them yet? No. Tomorrow I have a meeting with one. He keeps the North Cemetery, answered Andrew's mistress. As soon as I agree with him, we'll visit him together. Before 9 o'clock, Carla had discussed everything she wanted. Now she could go home in high spirits, for the day when she would be happy was drawing near. Why couldn't she divorce Riley and take her half? A difficult question. The woman was sure she was worth far more than some handouts. Besides, she'd spent so many years working for her husband. He was obligated to compensate her for that. Many people think that women, because of their lack of physical strength, can't be violent. But that's just an illusion. Some representatives of the weaker sex can be so vindictive and insidious that you can just be horrified at how easily they are crucified with the unwanted. Suffice it to remember the queens and empresses, cruel was enough in any country. The ability to give life does not automatically confer humanity. So Carla could safely be called an insensitive person. She returned home, looked in on her husband. He was asleep. Carla turned off the TV and went to her room. She kept going over her plan in her head. Soon everything was going to be hers. In 6 months she would sell everything and go abroad, where Andrew would come to join her. Carla already had some business leads there. In her mind, she and her new husband would own a small company. This will be enough for them to have a cloudless family life. Perhaps Carla would decide to have children as well. She hadn't thought about that yet. Why did the woman wanted to go abroad? Because there was always the risk that something would come to light. Criminals always flee the scene of a crime. Abroad, she would feel completely safe. With such happy thoughts, she fell asleep that night. And in the morning, a new day awaited her. In some very serious business. Carla pretended to be asleep, when Riley walked in that morning. He didn't wake her up. He went to work. After breakfast, Carla headed to the funeral parlor up north. She'd been told by someone that they could arrange some not-so-legal business there. So Carla expected to get the information she needed today. The woman in high heels entered the not-so-pleasant room. She got the shivers. "Good afternoon." She addressed the man. "I need your master." "I'm listening to you," Eddie answered her. "What are you interested in?" "We have various options." "I'd like to talk to you privately." She hinted at a private conversation. Eddie took her into the back room. It was where he often handled such matters. "There's a man we need to bury, but not quite dead," Carla hinted. "Do you want us to bring him to the right state?" The owner smiled at once. "Yes, we owe you the doctor, and you owe us the morgue and everything else," she said. "Well, it's a question of price." The man kept his eyes on her. "It's too risky, as far as I'm concerned. You don't come from a poor family. Who wants to go to the other side eagerly?" "My husband," she whispered. "He's a horribly vile and disgusting man. So you see, there's no other way to deal with him." "I see," Eddie said knowingly. "You'll need a separate fee for the morgue." "All right, just take it one step at a time. He has to die the night before his funeral." "I don't know about that," Carla asked. "Then bring him to me tonight. We'll calm him down, put him to bed, and then make it look like his heart stopped." "That's not a bad plan," she smiled. "Name the amount. I need to see how much my beloved husband's life will cost me." Eddie wasn't going to be shy. Carla's eyes widened in surprise. She'd expected less. "You have to understand, too. I'm putting myself in jeopardy." The owner didn't want to undercut the price. "It's a deal." Carla held out her hand to him. "Then I'll call you when we're ready to bring him in." The scheme was very simple. A doctor comes to Riley's house, admits he's dead. They give him a sedative and take him to Eddie. He gets a certificate from the morgue. It's like the autopsy was done. That's it. Then on the day of the funeral, the coffin is taken straight to the cemetery, where people will begin to say goodbye to the deceased. Carla wanted to send her husband to the crematorium at first, but something inside her stopped her. Still, the coffin will be closed, because after Riley's heart stops, Eddie emphasized, he will also hemorrhage at the same time. Just like that, Riley's fate was sealed. No one knew how the adventure would actually end. Just before the finale, Carla was very affectionate with her husband so as not to arouse any suspicion. For several days in a row, they had romantic evenings. Riley was beginning to hope that his married life was about to change. But 2 more days passed, and it was time for the execution. Carla announced to her husband that they were going to have something special tonight. She set the table. Riley came home from work and almost lost his mind. Carla was waiting for him in a beautiful, sexy dress. "Well, you get prettier and prettier every time," her husband complimented her. "Carla, I'm crazy about you." They had a little snack. The woman put on some relaxing music and poured wine. To us, she handed her husband his glass. He drank it immediately and put his arm around her waist. "Do you want to dance?" she laughed. They twirled slowly in their dance as Riley suddenly became dizzy and fell to the floor. The sleeping pills Carla had slipped her husband had taken effect. An hour later, the right doctor arrived and wrote a death certificate, preliminarily ruling cardiac arrest. Riley was loaded into the car and driven toward the cemetery, where Eddie was waiting for him. And he made sure that the man was asleep. His man tied his hands and feet and put a gag in his mouth. After that, they put him in a special coffin. "The day after tomorrow at lunchtime, you'll pick him up," the funeral home owner said. "I'll stop by tomorrow to make sure everything is okay," Carla said. And the man agreed. Eddie called an acquaintance at the morgue to have the dead soul examined. The autopsy would confirm cardiac arrest. Sometimes that's what happens, especially since Riley had been complaining to his wife about heart pain lately. But he never made it to the doctor. So the customer left. She headed over to Andrew's place. He wasn't sleeping either. They celebrated the end of their case quite well. "I'll pick you up tomorrow at lunchtime," Carla told him goodbye. She had to make sure he did everything right. She didn't trust anyone, especially not in a case like this. And since she was a responsible person, she had to see to it herself. Riley came to his senses and found, to his horror, that he was lying in the middle of nowhere. It was dark. His hands and feet were bound. He couldn't scream either. The man tried banging his head and legs to make sure someone could hear him. Suddenly, the coffin opened. Some girl was sitting in front of it. Riley hoped she would save him, but the lid closed quickly and he was trapped again. So he started knocking again. Soon enough, someone spoke. The lid opened. There was a man standing in front of Riley, staggering from side to side. "Why are you making so much noise?" Andrew said unhappily. "Be patient, soon you will go to the other world. It won't be long now." So Riley wanted to jump out of the coffin, but he felt something stabbed into his shoulder, and 5 minutes later, he fell into a deep sleep. "That's it. That's enough." Andrew rubbed his hands together. That was kicking like a bull. "Why so worried? I don't understand." Andrew threw the syringe into the special waste. This garbage was never checked. The owner has already met with some important people. Baba, in Andrew's opinion, was behaving rather defiantly. Eddie opened the coffin and made sure Riley was asleep. Now it was just a matter of time. "If you don't drink tonight," he ordered his assistant. "You see, he'll get his last medicine at night." He put his hand to his temple. "Andrew, you know me." Andrew, what a bastard. Eddie was angry because Andrew never called him. It was early morning. Drunk again, he thought. At 8 o'clock, Eddie pulled up to the cemetery. He looked into the coffin. Riley lay there pale. He didn't look at him. He closed the coffin lid firmly, looked around, but Andrew was nowhere to be found. That meant he'd gone on a bender. Eddie waved goodbye. "As long as he gets the job done," he said, and went about his business. It wasn't the first time a man had been complicit in such an event. That's why he wasn't particularly worried. The previous times, everything had gone smoothly. So everything should be fine this time, too. Eddie calmly went about his business. He had to be free by lunchtime when they came for the coffin. The thoughts of the amount of money he'd made on Riley warmed his soul. "Still, I had the best job in the world." He stretched contentedly and squeezed his eyes shut with joy. "I wouldn't trade it for anything else." Eddie looked contentedly around at the coffins and other trappings of such an important ritual. People were willing to pay for death. So why not take that money? "Jesus, where's he again?" Emily worried. Her father didn't answer again. The daughter calmed down, then dialed his number again. Finally, at 10, she couldn't stand it and went to the cemetery. But Nicholas wasn't there. She called a cab again and went to the market. She found her father's landlord. "I don't know," he shrugged. "He didn't come today. I called him too, but he didn't answer." Emily was exhausted, but she went back to the cemetery. The man who worked there during the day was digging a grave for the deceased, who was to be buried today. "Yes, he forgot his phone." The man held out the phone to her. "I don't know. Earlier than me, he left today." Emily figured her father would be home by now. She made her way to the gate. With her leg like that, it was hard to move fast. She got into the elevator. She was sure her father was waiting for her at home, but it was empty. "Daddy!" she cried. God, what had happened to him? Emily's nerves gave way. The girl called a cab for the umpteenth time today, drove to the cemetery again. It was almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and she saw people gathered nearby. Out of inertia, Emily headed there, looking for her father with her eyes. She didn't pay attention to what was going on. Just then, a scream was heard. Emily noticed a woman in a black veil screaming loudly. A coffin was lifted up and began to be lowered into the grave. Everything blurred before Emily's eyes. From somewhere in her chest, an inhuman scream burst out. "Stop!" She shouted across the cemetery. "There's a living person in there." Everyone turned on her without exception. "Open up." Emily pulled out her cell phone with lightning speed. "I'm going to call the police." "Who is this crazy woman?" "The woman in black. Get her out of here right now." "Police," Emily yelled into the phone. "They're burying a man alive in here." The widow fainted. Someone rushed to her, then pulled the coffin out of the grave. People started demanding to open the lid. They opened it, and oh God, in the coffin lay a man with his hands and feet bound and a gag sticking out of his mouth. "He's alive. Someone felt for a pulse. He's breathing. Get an ambulance. Call an ambulance." They tried to kill him, Emily screamed, keeping her eyes on the widow. You did it. She lashed out at Carla. Andrew quickly grabbed her arm and headed for the cemetery exit. People didn't know what to do. What's going on out there? Eddie looked out at the screens. He saw Carla running toward the gate with the man. The funeral director went pale, rushed to the grave. Riley was lying on the ground there. His arms and legs had already been freed, but he was sound asleep. One thing was certain, the man was alive. Eddie took his own pulse. It was faint, but it was audible. Bastard, he scolded to himself. Where is that thing? He headed indoors to call Andrew. Oh, Nicholas touched his head. Mom, what happened to me? He crawled out from under the rolls. Someone downstairs was wheezing. The man dug out a drunken Andrew. Your piece of work, he threw him to the floor. Damn you to hell. He swore and staggered toward the exit. What are you doing here? Eddie's jaw dropped when he saw the guard. He waved his hand. Nicholas needed a breath of fresh air, but as soon as he stepped outside, he was out of it. All around the cemetery, people were running around like ants. What's going on? Nicholas grabbed his head. Maybe I'm going crazy. Sirens could be heard. Almost simultaneously, the police and ambulance arrived. Nicholas saw someone being carried away on a stretcher. The man sat down on the ground because he was very dizzy. Daddy! Emily ran up to him. Daddy, where have you been? Nicholas' eyes swam again, and he lost consciousness. He woke up at home. There was a wet towel on his head. He groaned. Emily came to him. It's okay, she petted him. Dad, I was so worried. The doctor said you were poisoned. They found a small amount of poison in your blood. Not me, force, but the guy in the coffin. I tried to save him, but that asshole injected me. Emily sat there all pale. If it hadn't been for her father, the man in the coffin would have died. They told each other everything that had happened to them. Both of them were amazed by these events. The next day, Nicholas felt better and called the police officer to give a statement. They have already confessed, the policeman said. Thank you for your help. If it wasn't for you, he would have been killed for sure. After a week, father and daughter calmed down a bit. Nicholas gave up guarding the cemetery. He went back to his formulae. Mother of God, he jumped up. I was wrong. He clutched his head. Why did I put the odds at 1 and 3 instead of 1 and 5? That means he thought for a moment. It means that in the long run, my rig will fail. It just won't work. This discovery saddened him on the one hand and pleased him on the other. After all, he was going to do some serious testing on his machine before he applied for a patent. And that meant Nicholas, hello, in the evening called him a former colleague from the laboratory. Can you believe it? Swan's been assassinated. I'm sorry, but I heard they found a defect in your car, said the former colleague. I know, Nicholas laughed merrily, and I'm the only one who knows why. So he couldn't fool me. That's how it is. Sometimes we think that there was a real tragedy, and then some events happen, and it becomes clear that it was the best thing that could have happened. Nicholas walked into his daughter's room. She was typing something at the computer. Emily, God is on our side, he hugged her. You have no idea how happy I am. Now, Nicholas could put together a new rig that would actually work. I'll try to find a sponsor, he sighed. Maybe someone will be interested in my invention and engine. Someone rang the doorbell. The owners were alarmed. They thought it was the police. They came from time to time to verify Riley's statement. Hello, Nicholas turned pale. It's you. He stared at the visitor's face. I'm glad he could finally get out to see you. I'm sorry I didn't thank you sooner. Come in. He opened the door wider. Do we have guests? Who's there? The girl ran out into the corridor and froze like a stumbling block. Unlike her father, she remembered that face very well. The tea eased the tension, and the acquaintances were able to start a conversation. Nicholas was the first to speak. The policeman said they confessed to everything. His voice trembled. It seems to me that no human being could have conceived such a thing. Only the devil. They're all going to jail. They're in the detention center now, Riley replied. And thanks to both of you, I've been resurrected. Thank you. I can't thank you enough. Riley, wouldn't you do the same? Nicholas stared into his eyes. Why do people make heroes out of ordinary people to make themselves look good? May I thank you in some way, insisted the guest. I sincerely want it. Well, all right, came to Nicholas a thought. I don't need it for myself. If you agree to do something for people. I agree, he answered without listening. I don't care how. But I want to thank life for what it has done for me. 2 years passed. Nicholas, hello. Someone entered the laboratory. How are you doing? Oh, Riley. It's good to see you, my father-in-law smiled. He was dirty. There were 2 other people hustling around. Thanks for the helpers. Good guys. Nicholas, the guest said formally. Will you let us go on vacation for a week? You don't want to go on vacation with us? I certainly don't. I'm about to launch. You can go, he said with a wave of his hand. Just keep an eye on Emily. I'm looking forward to my grandson. Who am I going to pass on all my knowledge to? Him, of course. I could not, and he will definitely become a luminary of science. And you did, Riley replied seriously. What you've done for us and our children is priceless, and we will always remember you. I'm pregnant by your husband. After learning of her husband and sister's betrayal, Jennifer left for the country. And barely. Jennifer was just leaving the clinic when she got a call from her younger sister. Hi, what are you doing? Her sister's voice vibrated with joy, which was very audible even over the phone. I just got off work, Jennifer replied tiredly. I'm getting off work. I'm going to drive home and sleep it off. Listen, sister, Maggie said. It's the same thing every day. Aren't you tired of living such a boring life yourself? Jennifer gritted her teeth to keep herself from saying something sarcastic to Maggie. No, she'd always been able to keep her temper in check with her younger sister. But lately, apparently because of the increased workload and the unstable family situation, Jennifer was beginning to feel her nerves fraying. Aren't you tired of telling me the same thing every time? She said. Jennifer got into the car and switched on the ignition. She wanted to go home, have a cup of tea, take a bath, and then crawl into bed with a blanket over her head. Well, I'm sorry, Maggie said in a softer voice now. No offense. I just wanted to ask you something. I didn't even doubt it, Jennifer thought to herself with annoyance. Then she turned on the car's heater. It was the middle of October outside. By 7 p.m., it was very dark outside, and it was also very cold, which was not conducive to a better mood and the desire to do anything but relax. Did you ask me not to drag this out? Jennifer said. More money? Maggie clucked her tongue. I haven't asked you for money in a long time. What are you saying to me, Jen? No, I wanted to ask you for your suitcase. Can you lend it to me for about a week? Well, 10 days tops. Are you going somewhere? Asked the older sister, more out of politeness than genuine interest. Yes, I'm going to the sea. Maggie answered cheerfully. Unlike you, my plans are not all about work and home. You're the one who has always lived a boring and proper life. Jennifer remained silent. Indeed, she had always tried to live right. But did it really look boring from the outside? Perhaps for a 23-year-old girl, life between home and work does seem gray and dull. But that was Jennifer's life before marriage. Maybe she really is living life the wrong way. Von Bridget is constantly traveling somewhere and manages to work, and her personal life is boiling. And Jennifer, right after graduation, got married, got a job at the clinic, and since then in her life almost nothing has happened. Early rise in the morning, then the road to work, then the reception of patients from morning to lunch, in the afternoon work with documents or visits to patients at home. Even on weekends, Jennifer managed to work in a private clinic. When she was on holiday, she either went on training courses or spent time at seminars and conferences. For her almost 30 years of life, she has never been to the sea, did not fly on a plane on holiday, did not buy herself a beautiful swimming costume. I guess her life really was boring and dull. Mine. Maggie even giggled into the phone. Can you hear me? I need a suitcase. You're always going on holiday, Jennifer replied, distracted from her sad thoughts. Don't you have a suitcase? Can you believe it? Maggie kept talking into the phone. unable to get a word in edgewise. On my last trip, my suitcase was dropped when I was reloading my luggage. It cracked, and I haven't been able to buy a new one since. You bet Jennifer thought to herself, sighing and listening to the complaining speech. You go to resorts several times a year. You don't even have time to buy a suitcase between trips. And then she regretted it and scolded herself for being too hard on her younger sister. After all, it wasn't Maggie's fault that Jennifer preferred work to leisure and could afford regular trips to the sea. "When can I come to your place to pick up my suitcase?" Maggie asked, again forcing Jennifer to switch her thoughts. "You can come whenever you want to come." "Tomorrow," said her sister cheerfully. "I don't suppose you're in any condition to receive guests today?" "Yes, tomorrow afternoon would be better. Tomorrow's Saturday. I'll be seeing patients at the clinic until 3, so come after 3. "That's fine. Thank you." The nurse chirped something else into the phone, musing about how her trip was going so well. Autumn was setting in outside. She'd be going to some hot country, splashing in the warm sea, and she wouldn't have to freeze in the city until the heating came back on. Jennifer got home at about 8 o'clock. She entered the empty flat, found the light switch in the hallway by feel, and switched on the light. She sat down on the banquette by the entrance, stretched her legs out. She sighed heavily. How lonely it was on nights like this, when Winston was late at work and Jennifer had to return to the empty, dark flat. How many times she'd wanted a cat or a dog, but then she'd talked herself out of it because she realized that because she and her husband were always busy at work, it would be hard for the poor creature to sit alone and cooped up for long hours. She took her phone out of her coat pocket. Jennifer dialed Winston's number. She didn't expect her husband to answer immediately, or that he would answer her call at all. Sure enough, the phone rang with long beeps, and her husband never answered. After preparing a quick dinner and taking a shower, Jennifer looked longingly at her mobile phone screen. Her husband never called back or even texted. Jennifer, trained by life experience, realized that it was useless to wait for a call from her eternally busy spouse. Winston, the head of the department at the regional hospital, was busy 24 hours a day. He could have an emergency operation, some urgent concilium that required his obligatory participation. There could have been a meeting. All in all, Jennifer had long since become accustomed to the fact that her husband was a very busy man. She didn't work and didn't voice her opinion on the matter. Already falling asleep in bed after a hot shower and dinner, Jennifer heard the phone ring. It was Winston calling. "I'm just leaving work." Jennifer jumped up sharply in bed and looked at the wall clock. It was past 11 o'clock in the evening. She hadn't noticed herself falling into slumber. "I'm waiting for you." "Shall I heat up dinner?" Jennifer asked. "No need. I had a snack at work. We had a meeting. Everyone was hungry by then, so we decided we'd order pizza. Anyway, I've eaten so I don't have to bother reheating the food." Jennifer breathed a sigh of relief. By the time her husband arrived home, she had a headache. So after waiting for Winston, she immediately fell asleep, not really knowing what the head of the department was so late for. In the morning, when she awoke, she found her husband no longer at home. Hopelessness, longing came over Jennifer. She ate breakfast and stared out the window alone. Then she started to get ready for her part-time job at a private clinic. For more than 5 years, Jennifer had been working as a general practitioner at the city's polyclinic, while managing patients at private clinics. She enjoyed her work, especially when she saw the results of her labor and heard the words of gratitude from her patients. Everything was going well in her work. And even despite all the difficulties, Jennifer always came out of work satisfied with herself and the results of her work. As for her personal life, then everything was not as simple as we would like. Jennifer's husband, Winston Kudryashov, was older than his wife for 20 years, and for 15 years he had been the head of a department at the regional hospital. As a specialist, Winston enjoyed high prestige, had behind his back a huge professional experience, thousands of grateful patients, and a lot of awards. Jennifer felt like a girl next to him, and given the difference in age, experience in both professional and life, the young wife only had to listen to the opinion of her wise husband. "Why are you marrying such an old man?" Jennifer was asked by her mate Maggie. "Is it a duty? Winston is almost 45, he's older than you, and he's older than you, and he's a doctor. So you'll be in constant competition. He's bound to always be better than you. He is the best for me, Jennifer replied with a smile. I love this man very much. You have no idea how strong my feelings for him are. She was 24 years old at the time. She was in her final year of medical school, and Winston, in her eyes, was a medical guru. Jennifer even then looked into the mouth of her future husband, listened to his advice, listened to stories from practice, and believed that fate has made her a real gift in the form of meeting and mutual sympathy with such an intelligent, beautiful, and very responsive man. They met when Jennifer was 20 years old. Winston had already turned 40. She was in her third year of university, and he was consulting teachers at the university and lectured for a while on obstetrics and gynecology. Jennifer met Winston in the library. He was just dictating to one of the students a list of literature required for the course. Jennifer went there to prepare for the seminar. "Young lady, you're wasting your time in this library," Winston addressed her when she asked the librarian to look for an ophthalmology textbook for her. "Why wasted?" Jennifer looked up in surprise at the man she had often met in the walls of her university. Winston did not lecture at them, but the girl had seen his picture in the hall and knew exactly who he was. Because the university's library is sparse on teaching materials. In terms of terminology, I advise you to buy your textbooks from a bookstore. Or better yet, order them online, Winston replied. "That's a strange suggestion from you," Jennifer grinned. "Usually our library gets all the praise, and you say the exact opposite." "I just always tell the truth," Winston said. Winston grinned, then winked at the librarian. "And don't look at me like that, Rachel. Am I wrong? Your library's been short on manuals for a long time," he said. "You're right, Winston," she sighed. Jennifer took a couple of textbooks. As she left the library, she ran into Winston again. "Will you take my advice?" he asked. Jennifer looked at Winston in surprise. "What kind of advice? Go to the shop or order online?" "Well, going to the shop and choosing the textbook you want would be faster. While you're waiting for the online order, it might not be relevant to you." Jennifer shrugged her shoulders. "Well, I'll go to the bookshop then. Can I give you a lift?" Jennifer was taken aback. She had never once spoken to this man. She hadn't even paid attention to him, thinking he was too experienced and not interested in talking to young female students. Winston's question, however, confused her. She looked at him incredulously, then nodded suddenly. "Okay, bring me in." From that day on, communication began between them. At first it was just idle chatter, not so much about medicine, but about the lives of students and faculty, Jennifer's childhood and Winston's adolescence. It turned out that the man had been married once. "My ex-wife herself filed for divorce because of eternal employment, and I did not keep around a woman who was far from medicine and considered my work frivolous," said Winston. "She was not ready to wait for me in the evenings and wanted me to socialize with other women, jealous of them and of my work too. But as a gynecologist, how could I restrict myself from socializing with the female sex? It's my job, my duty, my life after all. And then I realized that I could only live with a woman who, like me, has something to do with medicine, who would be sympathetic to my late returns and would not make hysterics and scandals about it." "Is that so much to ask, Jennifer?" Winston asked. Jennifer shook her head at the sound of her name in Winston's mouth. Goosebumps ran down her spine. She looked at the man differently now. In him, Jennifer saw a kindred spirit, someone close to her in spirit. Even more so. The thought that she could become a doctor and even his wife in the future made her sweetly dizzy. In the meantime, their relationship had moved to a new level, and now Jennifer often stayed overnight in Winston's flat. She felt relaxed and confident around this man. She knew that Winston was old enough and experienced enough. He would not hurt her, always support her, and also help her with her studies and explain simple truths. In general, the girl was happy, but to the last did not believe that Winston could make her a proposal. Arriving home to her parents in a small provincial town 250 kilometers from the regional center where she studied, Jennifer immediately told the truth about her relationship with a man who was almost twice her age. "Are you crazy?" Her mother rounded her eyes and clutched her head. You are 23 years old and he is 43. 20 years is almost a lifetime. 2 decades. Jennifer's father wasn't thrilled with his daughter's choice, but he was sympathetic to her feelings. Sharon, why do you resent it so much? There are a million families in the world, and they're strong enough, where the husband is older than his wife. It would be worse if it were the other way around. And Jennifer would be the guy who fell in love with an old aunt, he said. Dad, Winston is not old. Jennifer interceded for her lover. He's mature, he's wise, he's very experienced. What kind of doctor is he? Asked her mother. I'm glad your Winston is a good doctor, she said, her lips tightening. But it would be good if he was your age, not 20 years older. Edith, this is a disaster. Edward only hummed, without saying anything else. After a while, Jennifer dared to invite Winston to her parents' house for a visit. They came along with a cake and a bouquet of flowers. And then Marion melted, seeing before her a manly and intelligent man. Edic also did not say another word about what he thought about the choice of his daughter. Then Jennifer finally realized that Winston was the man with whom she would be truly happy. Maggie, however, when she saw what a grown-up groom her older sister had brought into the house, did not keep silent. He's an old man. Wrinkled nose, said 17-year-old Maggie when she and her sister were alone. What do you need it for? Jennifer wanted to take offense at her sister's words, but then she managed to resist the urge and smiled softly. You're not the one who has to live with him. What am I, you crying about him being old for me? Maggie twitched her nose upwards and wrinkled it funny again. Well, he's going to be a relative of mine. You look at him like you want to eat him. I'm sure you're already dreaming of marriage and a long life with that old man. Don't call him that, Jennifer said, feeling herself getting angry with her younger sister. He's not an old man. He's only 20 years older than I am. When you choose a fiancé, you can choose your own, but don't meddle in my affairs. Your choice. Maggie shrugged her shoulders. But sooner or later you'll regret marrying such an old man. Her younger sister's words were not prophetic. And not once in almost 6 years of married life Jennifer did not regret that she agreed to become Winston's wife. He proposed to her in her 5th year. Then Jennifer moved into his spacious 2-bedroom flat. Soon received a diploma, got a job in the clinic, and was going to enter the residency. When her parents came to visit their daughter for the first time after the wedding, they no longer opposed Jennifer's choice, but on the contrary, they were happy that the girl so successfully married and settled in the regional center. First impressions are deceiving, Marion grinned, strolling through the huge 3-bedroom apartment in the center of town. Winston turned out to be a very nice man. He paid for the wedding and brought you to his place. Hang on to him, daughter. He's a good man. I know, Jennifer said with a smile. She was in love, happy and ready to move mountains. Being a doctor was a pleasure. Jennifer was sure that she had found a job she liked, and the results of her work pleased her. And each time convinced Jennifer that she had done the right thing. The only thing that confused the young wife of the famous gynecologist was that Winston constantly discouraged her from entering the residency. Don't you like being a general practitioner? He asked. You're all glowing. You're happy to be working. So why go to school and waste your time doing it? Jennifer didn't argue with her husband because she wasn't used to it. Winston's word was always paramount to her. So after a few months of thinking about her future, Jennifer decided that she would stay on as a general practitioner in a regular clinic. Her friends who had gone to university with her only shrugged their shoulders as they listened to Jennifer's explanations for her refusal to continue her studies. Don't you think your Winston is just afraid of competition? One of her former classmates once asked Jennifer. You'll become a subspecialist and overshadow him with your practice. You what? Jennifer only laughed as she listened to her friend's words. Winston is too experienced and wise enough to be afraid of competition. Besides, he's a gynecologist, which is not my field of expertise. Are you always defending him? Grinned her mate. You're used to the fact that he controls you in everything. He makes you dance to his tune. Personally, I'd be offended if my husband behaved like that. That's why Winston's my husband, not yours. Jennifer tried to make a joke, but she was suddenly uncomfortable. What if there was truth in her friend's words? What if Winston was afraid that his wife might be better than him? Jennifer carefully avoided these thoughts. She didn't want to think badly of her husband. She loved him too much. 2 years after the marriage was registered, Jennifer thought about having a child. She was already 26. Her husband was an excellent gynecologist and she had no fears about motherhood. "Winston," she said, trying not to make the words sound like a decision she'd made alone, "do you want children?" Winston looked at his wife somewhat distantly, as if Jennifer had started a conversation off topic. "Honey, why are you asking me that? You're 26 years old. It's too young to be thinking about this." "It is." Jennifer was annoyed by Winston's words. "I'm 26 years old, which is the right age to have a baby. You don't have children from your first marriage. Maybe it's time to become a father." There was so much hope and anticipation in Jennifer's voice that she could barely contain her emotions. As for Winston, it was as if he had no desire to become a father. "It's too early. Do your work. You need to make a name for yourself to be able to advance in the future." "But how am I going to get ahead if I'm just going to sit in a regular GP's office? You're the one who talked me out of going to school, and now you're talking me out of having a baby." Jennifer didn't notice that she had spoken with resentment in her voice, and she stopped when she saw her husband's stern look. "It's not time yet," Jennifer Winston said. And that was the end of the matter. Jennifer, unused to arguing with her husband because of his unwavering authority and age, had given herself her word that she would not bring up any more talk that displeased Winston. But Marian was not afraid to ask her eldest daughter such questions. "Do you and Winston think about children at all?" The question was painful, and Jennifer even wrinkled her nose at the unpleasant feeling inside. She and Winston had never revisited the topic of future parenthood, and what to answer her mother, Jennifer did not know. She was used to telling everyone the truth: her husband, her family, her colleagues, and her patients. But now that the question touched on such a painful subject, Jennifer didn't know how she could gently skirt the sharp edges. "It's too early for us. I'm working. Winston's working. There's plenty of time," she said. I wouldn't say that Marian objected, looking closely at her daughter's face. "You'll be 30 soon. And you say it's early. I gave birth to you when I was 23. And that wasn't considered too early to give birth. It's harder to have a baby after 30. There's more pain and less time. What am I explaining to you? You're a doctor yourself." Jennifer was ashamed to admit to her mother that her husband didn't want children and thought it was too early for them to become parents. Winston was about to turn 50. That was a decent enough age for a man, especially one who had no children yet. Jennifer honestly didn't understand why her husband was so resistant to the idea of children, not interested in her women's health or trying to strengthen their family. It was getting harder and harder to return home. No one was waiting for Jennifer there. She longed for a husband who was always late at work. She even began to understand the first wife of Winston, who complained about the constant absences of her husband from home and filed for divorce because of his eternal employment. But when Jennifer remembered Winston's words about how much he wanted to meet someone who would understand him and not complain about his passion for work, she immediately tried to ward off the thought of resenting her husband for his devotion to his favorite work. Having calmed down a little mentally, Jennifer decided that she didn't want to get herself worked up anymore, that she had chosen the fate of being the wife of the head of one of the departments of a regional hospital. So it was not worth complaining about her plight or berating Winston for her constant absence from home and being in the hospital. After her appointment at the private clinic, she dialed her husband's number. "Where are you?" "Still in the hospital." Jennifer asked the questions automatically, subconsciously guessing what Winston would answer her. "I'm at home, cooking dinner," her husband answered, and Jennifer's heart jumped joyfully in her chest. She'd been telling herself that Winston didn't want to be home with her, that he was looking for any excuse to stay late at work, and that he'd neglected his chores. "You surprise me," Jennifer said with undisguised joy. "What are you cooking?" "You'll find out when you get home," Winston laughed. "Maybe I want to surprise you? It won't be a surprise." Jennifer thought with awe of how wonderful her husband was. She was lucky, after all. And even though they were so rarely together, he was and still was the best man on the planet. As she entered the flat, she heard Winston's voice and someone else's female laughter. It wasn't until a moment later that Jennifer realized exactly where she had heard that laughter. It was her younger sister Maggie laughing. Jennifer remembered that Maggie was supposed to pick up her suitcase, but her sister usually called or texted her. She'd arrived without a call or a text. "Oh, sister, hello." Maggie waved to Jennifer without rising from her chair in the kitchen. "I thought I'd never see you again. Why didn't you call me?" Jennifer didn't like the fact that Maggie showed up at her house unannounced. "Why?" Maggie wondered. But the smile flickered off her lips. "You told me to come round after 3. I did. We never said we'd call or text." Jennifer didn't know why she resented her little sister's arrival so much. Maggie didn't seem to have done anything wrong. She had arrived on time, and they hadn't really agreed to call in advance. But for some reason, her sister's smile, her happy face, and her contented look caused Jennifer to feel a rush of negativity. What's wrong with me? Jennifer asked herself that question, but she had no answer. Maggie hadn't annoyed her this much before, even though she didn't always watch her words and sometimes offended Jennifer. Maggie was the exact opposite of her older sister. Daring, self-assured, self-loving, and not tolerating objections, and Jennifer was malleable, kind, and non-confrontational. It was easier for her to agree than to argue to the point of frothing at the mouth. Maggie liked to argue, refute, prove her point of view, even if it was obvious that it was wrong. Winston set the table. By the time his wife returned from work, he had prepared fish and salad. Jennifer looked at the utensils Winston was setting on the table, but she couldn't remember the last time her husband had cooked anything himself. It had happened, but only at the beginning of the relationship, when Jennifer was still living in his flat as his wife-to-be. As soon as they legalized their relationship, all the duties of cooking, cleaning, laundry, and other household chores were fully transferred to the newly married wife of Winston. "Are you guys going on holiday?" Maggie asked in a cheerful voice. Jennifer heard a kind of gloating in her sister's question. Maggie regularly went on holiday with different men and in different countries, often allowed herself to go abroad alone. Jennifer, on the other hand, had never been to another country in her nearly 30 years of life. "We don't have time for holidays," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and confident. "We are working. You're the free-flying one." "That's right," Maggie smiled broadly. "I know how to take everything in life, and you all work and work until you retire. Is that how you're going to live?" Jennifer glanced at her husband sitting next to her. Winston was eating his fish with a nonchalant face, as if he wasn't even listening to what the women were saying at the table. "We're not." Jennifer rose abruptly from the table. "Have you eaten? Go get your suitcase." Maggie's face changed instantly. The smile fell from her lips, her eyebrows furrowed. The younger sister clearly hadn't expected such blatant inhospitality from her older sister. "Jennifer, what are you doing?" She pouted. "I'm not bragging or making fun of your lifestyle. Well, you like to work. I don't mind." "Of course you do," Jennifer snorted. "Get your bags. Go and get ready for your next holiday. I'm very tired. Tomorrow is my only day off, and I really want to rest at least that day." Maggie was clearly offended. She thanked Winston dryly for lunch, then took her suitcase and, after a brief goodbye to Jennifer, left the house. Winston was silent the whole time and expressed no emotion. Suddenly he asked, "What are you doing? What, did she do something bad to you?" "What makes you think that?" "It's just that she takes up a lot of my time, effort, and energy. I'm tired, Winston. I wanted to spend this weekend with you, and here's Maggie and her stories about her trouble-free life." Winston grinned. "Are you jealous or something?" Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. Her husband, who had always been characterized by his independence of opinion and lack of any emotion towards outsiders, had suddenly asked a rather strange question. A question that made Jennifer suddenly feel ashamed. Really, is it envy? Maggie was usually jealous of her older sister because she had things Maggie didn't have, opportunities Maggie didn't have due to her age. Guys who liked her older sister better than her younger sister. Jennifer was always one step ahead. And by the time she was 30, it suddenly slowed down and Maggie began to pull ahead in the quality of her life. She wasn't burdened with work, liked men, handled them skillfully, getting everything she needed and more. Jennifer seemed to be mired in her gray and boring life, with nothing but work and love for her husband. Her mood had completely soured after her sister left. And even though Winston stayed at home and was not going anywhere for work, Jennifer constantly replayed in her head her dialogue with Maggie. And why did her older sister have so much negativity inside her towards her younger sister? They had been communicating less and less lately. It had been fine at first. As soon as Maggie moved to New York, she was constantly asking to borrow money or to sleep over at Jennifer and Winston's flat. In the last 2 years, Maggie had become quite independent of both her parents and her older sister. I completely forgot to tell you, Winston distracted his wife from sad thoughts. On Tuesday, I'm leaving for a scientific and practical congress on obstetrics and gynecology. It turns out that I was scheduled to attend the congress, but I got so busy that I forgot about it. That's strange. Jennifer looked at her husband in surprise. Usually you prepare for congresses in advance. Suddenly you seem to have changed your attitude to such events. Winston brushed it off. Work's a mess. People are quitting in droves and going to private clinics. I've lost track of time. HR called me last night and reminded me about the trip. Where are you going? Jennifer suddenly had a brilliant idea in her voice. What if she went to the Congress with her husband, took a few days off at work, spent time with Winston, and generally changed the environment? The idea was reckless, unusual for Jennifer, but she, annoyed by the meeting and conversation with her younger sister, suddenly also wanted to change something in her life. To Boston, Winston said, for 5 days. Jennifer smiled. What if I come with you? Take a leave of absence at my own expense, and we'll go to Boston together. I'll walk around the city waiting for you. We'll go to restaurants, visit a museum, go to the theater. Do you remember the last time we went out together? Winston shook his head. The Congress will go on from morning until late at night, and I won't have time to go to the theaters and restaurants, Winston said. You're going to be upset, and you're going to tug at me and keep asking me when I'm coming to see you. I'll piss you off with my absence, and our mini holiday will be a nightmare. I've been through this before, honey, and I don't want it again. Jennifer looked at her husband as if he were directly discouraging her from traveling together. Not once in the 6 years they had been together had she said a word of reproach to him. Not once had she held him or made a scandal of his prolonged absences. Why now Winston spoke as if he did not know his wife at all, as if she in his eyes had turned into his ex-wife, whom he tried with all his might to forget. Winston, don't you want me to come with you? Jennifer asked uncertainly, still hoping she was imagining it. I do, Winston said hotly. He jumped up from the couch where he'd been sitting watching TV, running around the living room with his arms crossed behind his back. Jennifer watched her husband as if she didn't recognize him as the man she had loved for so many years. But I also want to work in peace, without the distraction of worrying about you sitting in a foreign city waiting for me. I want to meet my colleagues, chat with my professors. I want to get some sleep, after all. Okay, Jennifer interrupted Winston and nodded briefly. Please, just don't be so nervous. Let it be as you say. Winston abruptly stopped talking, sat down on the sofa and continued watching some medical TV program. Jennifer sat next to him and occasionally glanced at her husband, but it was as if he didn't see her. They used to sit and watch TV together like this, but now they had become complete strangers to each other. No children together, no jointly acquired property, no desire to go out and spend time together. Maybe this is the end of our marriage? Jennifer thought bitterly. He does not even want to hug me, kiss me. And we haven't had intimacy in almost a month. My husband hasn't laid a finger on me in a month, and that thought made me feel even more miserable. It seemed as if the whole world called family, so lovingly maintained for 6 years, had collapsed. Winston left on Tuesday, and up to that point nothing at all had changed in their relationship with Jennifer. The spouse no longer initiated intimacy. Jennifer kept looking at Winston, trying to figure out if he'd really lost interest in her, or if she was just imagining the problem. There's no need to see me off, her husband said at once. I'll go straight from the hospital to the airport. 5 days will fly by, and I'll be sure to bring you a present from Boston. Would you like that, honey? Of course I do, Jennifer said, and smiled a strained smile. The mood had been bad for a long time, and the situation with her husband's departure had spoilt it even more. Now Winston had asked her not to walk him to the airport, even though Jennifer couldn't do that. She worked until 3, and Winston's plane was due to leave at 5. Returning to the empty flat became a complete drag for Jennifer. She tried to stay late at work, pretending to work on paperwork and reports while she tried to stretch her time so she could get home as late as possible. The clinic closed at 8 p.m., and by that time Jennifer had to go home anyway, having vacated her office. To distract herself and not go crazy with boredom, Jennifer even signed up for yoga. She decided that she would attend a yoga studio in the evenings instead of coming home. It was both good for her health and a way to pass the time. When Jennifer returned from her first class on Thursday, she felt much better. She seemed to be energized after the workout. Her muscles were humming nicely and her body felt pleasantly tired. She wanted to go to bed as soon as possible, so that the day would be over. The sooner it was over, the sooner the new one would come. It wouldn't be long before Winston returned. Lying in bed under a blanket and looking at her social networking page, Jennifer saw Maggie's holiday photos. Her younger sister posed against the sea, standing in a brightly colored swimming costume. Jennifer quickly woke up looking at the pictures, trying not to dwell on the unpleasant thoughts that had arisen in her head. Enviously again, she thought, and quickly refreshed her social media page so that the pictures of her beautiful and happy little sister would disappear from her sight as soon as possible. However, updating the page, Jennifer suddenly noticed something unpleasantly cutting her eyes on one of the photos published by Maggie. Returning to her sister's page, Jennifer scrutinized Maggie's postings once more and then zoomed in on one of the photos. Her heart twitched unpleasantly in her chest. Her palms instantly sweated with excitement. In one of Maggie's photos, Jennifer saw a familiar figure in the reflection of a shop window. It was the figure of her husband, who had personally taken the photograph for the young girl. Jennifer enlarged the photo once more to make sure again that it was Winston. She recognized his figure, his hair, even his sunglasses. He was also wearing the plaid shirt Maggie had given him for the holiday. Back then, Jennifer had wanted to give that shirt to her father, but Winston had persuaded her to keep the gift. Maggie gave the shirt to me. Why should I give it to your dad? Winston asked unhappily. Because it doesn't suit you, Jennifer replied. Jennifer didn't know why she was suddenly so attracted to Maggie's gift. Maybe it was because the shirt fit Winston so well. Jennifer herself had never guessed his taste. Her husband always dressed himself in the shops. He picked out his own shirts, trousers, jeans. He even bought his own underwear. And then some Maggie gave him a nice gift that Winston liked. Jennifer was nervous at the time. She was uncomfortable that her husband openly admired Maggie's taste, but he had a very different opinion of his own wife's taste. Until the last moment, Jennifer didn't want to believe that Winston was in the photograph. Then suddenly she remembered how her husband didn't want her to go to Boston with him, how he refused to let his wife accompany him to the airport. And that dinner he'd cooked, supposedly for his wife, had probably been prepared solely in honor of Maggie's arrival. Jennifer grabbed the phone in her hands and dialed Winston's number. The caller is temporarily unavailable, an automated female voice answered. If Winston was in the United States, he would be in touch, but Jennifer's husband was in Greece, of that she had no doubt. Then she dialed the number of his colleague Kevin, who was filling in for Winston during periods of his absence. Never before had Jennifer called Kevin on her own just for fun. If Winston found out about his wife's behavior now, he would clearly be displeased. Jennifer, hello. Kevin's voice sounded soft and good-natured. What happened to Winston? I can't get him on the phone. Is there a problem with his connection in Boston? Jennifer clutched the phone tightly in her hand, feeling her fingers ache with tension. Boston? Kevin's voice sounded surprised now. Had he gone to Boston? As far as I know, your husband went to stay with his parents in Chicago. He told me his father was sick, so he took a week off at his own expense. Winston visits his father a lot. I mean, he lives alone, he gets sick a lot. Or, Jennifer, am I confused? Jennifer was silent, ready to cry. She knew very well that Winston does not communicate with his father. John Smith had lived in Philadelphia for many years, where he had gone with his new family while Winston was still at university. This story was told to Jennifer by Winston himself, but he apparently had a different version for his colleagues. "I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm on the phone with Winston," she said. "I got it wrong. I must have been working too hard." She switched off the connection, then tossed the phone aside with a squeamishness. Of course, no Winston had called her. She'd made up the story for Kevin, who could easily guess that Winston was misleading both his wife and his colleagues. So all her husband's trips to congresses, conferences, and other business trips were staged exclusively for her. For his colleagues, Dr. Smith went to his father, while his wife was quietly waiting for him at home, even unaware of the double life her husband led. After a while, Jennifer's hand reached for the phone. Fighting her own reluctance to know the truth, she went back to her sister Bridget's page. Here was her trip to Hawaii in April. Winston had flown to Los Angeles for a fortnight, and Jennifer had been surprised to see how tanned her husband had been when he returned from Los Angeles. And it turns out that in April in Los Angeles is so sunny. "I walked a lot. I did not notice how I burned," said Winston then. Jennifer didn't say anything to him. It did not even occur to her that her husband could be somewhere else, for example, in a hot country with her younger sister. And here was another of Maggie's trips, this time to the Bahamas. Winston was away from home then, too. He was supposedly on a flight to Denver. Except it was summer outside, and it was normal for him to return with a slight tan. There were other trips. Jennifer had counted at least 5 in the last 40 minutes. It had started almost 2 years ago. At least the joint disappearances from Jennifer's life had been observed since the December before last. And Ben had just turned 21 at the time. She'd barely graduated from university and got a job as a receptionist at a beauty parlor. But she worked there for just under 6 months. She quit in December, and then in March she and Winston were out of town together. Bridget chattered something about a new lover, after which there was another, then again another and another third. But Jennifer was not interested in her younger sister's private life, and for nothing. I wonder if she met only with Winston or in parallel? Jennifer thought. Did she have other men? She was still in shock at her own discovery. To have lived with her husband for so many years, and now to suddenly find out that for the past 2 years he had been lying to her, dating her sister, traveling the world with her, paying for her purchases, catering to her every desire. His wife had done his laundry, cooked his breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and waited faithfully for him at home. Without a word or a hint, she never let him know she was unhappy with anything. Jennifer was comfortable. People like her were usually called patient. By morning, she was sick of her own thoughts. All night she had been thinking that she had to make some decision about her future, because she would never have a future with Winston. I wondered, Jennifer thought, what was the purpose of this marriage show? He would have divorced me and lived with Maggie, if he liked being with her so much. He'd long since grown cold to me. Winston came home as promised on Sunday, happy and lightly tanned. He called Jennifer a couple of times via Messenger, sending her some meaningless pictures to put her guard down. She'd responded to him with something to keep Winston from guessing that she knew all about his cheating perfectly well. Jennifer prepared herself for the conversation, going to clear the air. She had to gather her strength to find the right words that would not make her feel ashamed. No, she wouldn't make hysterics and scandals. They would part ways quietly if Winston wanted them to. What do I want? Jennifer thought. I want to endure further. I am willing to endure because I love this man and would do anything to be with him. I haven't existed apart from Winston for a long time. I belong to him completely, unlike his soulmate that would die if I was separated from him. Winston talked cheerfully about his trip, making up stories as he went along that didn't really happen. Jennifer listened to him, smiling and nodding, while she realized with every passing minute that she couldn't tell Winston that she knew everything. She couldn't live without him. She never got round to talking to him, and after a few days she calmed down and decided that she would not part with her husband. She loved him and let him have an affair on the side. It was easy to break up a marriage, but to keep it together was still a challenge. So Jennifer decided she would endure to the end. At the end of another working day, when she was about to go home, there was a knock at her office. "The reception is over," Jennifer shouted, but the door opened anyway. Maggie stood on the doorstep, and the older sister's insides snapped at the sight of her younger sister. "Why are you here?" Jennifer asked with whitened lips. "We need to have a serious talk," Maggie replied. Jennifer realized then that something had happened. Something had happened that was out of her control. Something she had miscalculated. What it was, she was going to have to find out from her younger sister. "I'm pregnant," Maggie said after a long silence. The sisters sat next to each other, carefully avoiding the opportunity to look into each other's eyes, and remained silent until Maggie said two words that turned Jennifer's mind completely upside down. "Do I have to answer something?" Barely moving her lips, Jennifer asked. Jennifer's insides felt as if they had collapsed, and her lips and tongue stopped obeying her. "Shouldn't I?" Maggie replied shortly. "I'm the one who has to tell you. I'm pregnant by Winston, your husband. I'm tired of hiding the fact that I've been with him for a long time." Jennifer was silent. She fumbled with a piece of paper that had appeared on her desk. She couldn't say anything. It was like her tongue was stuck to her mouth. "Can you hear me?" Maggie asked demandingly. "I'm expecting your husband's child. I've been sleeping with him for a long time. A fortnight ago, he and I were on holiday in Miami, and before that we had sex at your house. Remember that spontaneous dinner at your place? You came over and told me to get my suitcase and you were leaving. I did. Only before that, I slept with your husband in your marital bed." The words were harsh, and Jennifer felt completely embarrassed by the filth. She didn't feel like it. She had tried to save her marriage to the last. Except who wanted it? Nobody. The child needed a father, no matter how immoral the child had been conceived. He was not to blame for his mother's recklessness, for his father's uncontrolled behavior. "What do you want from me?" Jennifer asked dryly. "For me to congratulate you? That I run home and scandalize my husband? That I look at myself in the mirror and try to see horns on my head?" Jennifer was about to scream, but Maggie, sitting across from her, kept her composure. Yes, that young woman had a lot of composure. She'd been scolded so many times by her parents, her grandmother, her teachers. Maggie didn't care about any of that. She had a way of keeping her cool, and that made Jennifer even more annoyed. "I want you to know the truth," Maggie said and stood up. "What you're going to do next, I don't know." "But I do," Jennifer said through gritted teeth. She left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume. Jennifer thought about it and breathed in the air, realizing that she had often smelled it on her husband's shirts, the same shirts that her younger sister Maggie must have helped him buy. Everything in her family wasn't real her husband's love, the family idol, the way they lived together. So there was no happiness in the Winston household. Then why did they waste their time on each other? Returning home after work, Jennifer caught Winston there. Quickly gathering the necessary clothes into her suitcase, she put her books, laptop, and tablet in there as well. Then she closed it and sat down next to it on the bed. Covering her eyes, she tried to listen to herself and her sensations. What did she feel? Fear, resentment, hurt, disappointment. The last was perhaps the most vivid feeling. It was disappointment that Jennifer felt at losing her fake family. It was only an imitation of happiness, so it was necessary to leave without regret. Taking a piece of paper, Jennifer wrote a short note to Winston in the quick handwriting she had become accustomed to during her years at the clinic. "I know all about you and Maggie. I see no point in staying in this house. I will divorce you myself. We have nothing to share. Let's part amicably." There were no other words that came to mind. Jennifer did not write a long speech, but simply picked up her suitcase and left the flat. She took one last look at the wedding photograph hanging on the living room wall, where she and Winston were smiling broadly and happily, and got into the car. Their happiness was still real then. Jennifer calmly drove out of the city, refueled, and drove down the motorway. There were more than 300 kilometers to go. Staring into the darkness, she tried to remain calm and composed. Around 5 a.m., she was near a village with no streetlights, but a crumbling sign at the entrance, and something that looked like a monument to chicken pox. Pulling over, Jennifer got out of the car, breathed in the fresh country air, and finally let the tears flow. For the 5 hours that Jennifer had been on the road, she had managed to remain calm and confident. But the village had turned her inside out. Standing in the darkness and the rain that had begun to fall, she felt endlessly tired and homesick. "Pull yourself together," she commanded herself, and then settled back behind the wheel and drove towards home. The house Jennifer stopped the car at had once belonged to her grandmother Julia, the mother of her father and Aunt Maggie. All her life, her grandmother had lived in this village 50 kilometers from her hometown. Several times she visited her son and his family, but she herself did not go anywhere further than the village. While Julia was still alive, she signed over her house to her eldest granddaughter Jennifer. Maggie, learning of this then, took great offense at her sister. "You always get the best of everything," she cried with tears in her voice, "and the best room and clothes. Now grandmother's house too." "My God, Maggie, don't scream." Marian then cringed at her youngest daughter's loud, hysterical scream. "It's a house in the middle of nowhere. What do you want it for? No one has bought anything in this village for a long time, so you wouldn't get any benefit even if your grandmother wrote the house in your name." "What's that got to do with it?" Maggie smeared tears down her face. "How am I any worse than Jennifer? Why does she get everything all the time and I get everything on my own?" Jennifer remained silent at the time. She remembered how many times during her grandmother's lifetime she had visited her in the village, monitored her health, went with her to the city clinic, prescribed medicines. Maggie had never once visited her grandmother in her entire adult life. Once in a while she called her, and that only to borrow money, which in the end did not return. But after the death of her grandmother, who left the house to the eldest granddaughter, Maggie took offense, as usual, accused her older sister that she gets everything for nothing, for the pretty eyes. Maggie didn't speak to Jennifer for a long time after that. The house, left after the death of Julia's grandmother, was small, rather dilapidated, but inside it was very cozy and warm. Jennifer, every time she came to the village to visit her grandmother's grave, stopped in the house with joy and awe, looking at the old crockery, photographs, paintings on the wall, small statuettes on the chest of drawers. And everything in the house was the same as it had been when Grandma Julia was still alive. As children, when Jennifer was 12 and Maggie was 6, they had come together to visit her grandmother for the summer. That summer seemed to Jennifer the happiest of her life, but Maggie didn't like it in the village. "I hate goat's milk, and I don't like cow's milk, it's fatty. And I don't want to eat pancakes. My grandmother can't bake them. And I won't eat the chicken that has been running around since morning, I feel sorry for it. And I will not go to the vegetable garden, my nose will burn. And then there will be a trace." Whatever Grandma Jennifer offered, Maggie refused. She did not like country life. The girl thought it was boring and monotonous, but Jennifer enjoyed spending time with her grandmother. Most of all, she liked to go with her grandmother Julia to the collective farm, where she worked as a veterinarian. Perhaps it was from these trips that Jennifer's love of medicine was born. "You have the makings of a future doctor," Julia said. "Think about your future. You may want to connect it with medicine." Jennifer had made up her mind then. She would definitely be a doctor, she would help people. That was her calling, and she was happy with her choice, immensely grateful to her grandmother for her support. And now Jennifer was back at her grandmother's house. Only this time she came not for a while, but for permanent residence. There was nowhere else to go. To stay in the house where Winston was, there was neither strength, nor desire, nor possibility. Jennifer could not claim her husband's flat. It was his personal property. And she had no place of her own, for until a few weeks ago the young woman had had the assurance that she would be with her husband until she was old. But no, not all wishes were destined to come true, and Jennifer had experienced this firsthand. Collapsing onto the bed, she buried her face into the pillow. The bedclothes smelled damp, and the house itself, unheated and uninhabited for several years, didn't look much like a cozy nest. Jennifer had a lot of work to do to put the house in order, quit her old job, get a job in the village, file for divorce. But most importantly, learning to live a new life in which Winston would no longer be there. Remembering him, Jennifer picked up the phone. 15 missed calls from her husband, 2 missed calls from her mother, and 1 from her father. Maggie hadn't called her, and Jennifer bitterly imagined how happy she and Winston were to be together. Calling her mother, Jennifer told it like it was. "I've left Winston. I'm going to live in the country." "How, but why? You have such an amazing husband. How did you have the courage to leave him? And more importantly, why?" "Ask your youngest daughter," Jennifer replied, feeling a surge of anger again. No, it was urgent to pull herself together, to push away the anger, jealousy, and resentment. There should be nothing in her life that connected her to the past. What has Maggie to do with it? Marion didn't hide her surprise. Maggie is expecting my husband's child. In fact, she's been seeing him for a long time. Mum, let's close this topic. I'll buy a new SIM card tomorrow and this number won't be available. I'm filing for divorce, changing my life and my job. Marion was still shouting something into the phone, but Jennifer wasn't listening to her anymore. Jennifer was terribly sleepy. It was already late at night. She didn't want to think about anything. She fell into sleep. At her grandmother's house, Jennifer thought longingly of the next day, which would now be radically different from the days she was used to. In the morning, she woke up with her nose tangled in the blanket. The house was cold, and it appeared that the first snow had fallen outside the window. Jennifer was glad that she had managed to cover the 300 kilometers on a dry road. But she would hardly have dared such a rash act if there had been ice on the motorway. She had to do something about the stove. She also had to buy groceries and call her former job. Having somehow explained the situation, Jennifer listened to a lot of complaints from the head doctor, but managed to agree to send her resignation letter by registered mail. "You've really let us down," shouted into the phone head doctor. And Jennifer understood it well without him. Leaving the polyclinic without a therapist in the midst of flu and acute respiratory viral infections was unfair, ill-considered, and selfish, in the doctor's opinion. Jennifer did not initiate him into the details of her personal life, saying that she went to another city for family reasons. Having resolved the job issue, she dressed warmly and went to the post office. "Oh my God," Jennifer, the operator, addressed her, holding out an envelope and a blank sheet on which Jennifer was to write her resignation letter. "Yes, that's me," Jennifer smiled weakly, remembering how she and her grandmother Julia had once gone to this woman's house to watch little newborn piglets. Postal Service operator Rachel lived 2 houses down from the late Julia. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to visit my grandmother's grave." "And why would you write a letter?" Jennifer sighed. Now she would have to get used to a new life where everyone and everything had to know everything. That was what village life was like, and there was nothing Jennifer could do about it. Jennifer guessed that after her visit to the post office, news of her arrival would spread throughout the village. "I'm going to live here," she decided that it was better to tell the truth at once than to answer a million more questions from the villagers. There were about 200 people living in the village. All of them had known the late Julia, and Jennifer herself might have to meet them all. Some she knew and remembered, some she had yet to make acquaintance with. Live Rachel's face stretched. "Why's that?" "You didn't fit in at the regional center." "No, it didn't," Jennifer sighed. "And we've got a paramedic about to retire." Now Rachel's face lit up with a happy smile. "Listen, you're a doctor. Why don't you come down to the paramedic station and talk to Sharon? She's just sitting there. She's almost 70 years old. She should be looking after her own health, not treating the villagers." Jennifer nodded, not really thinking about working at the paramedic station. In fact, she was more inclined to think about working in a nearby town that would have its own clinic. "Rachel, do you know who can help me with the cooker? I don't know how to use it. It's very cold in the house." "Is that what city folk mean?" Rachel grinned. "I think my Oliver can help you too." "Oliver?" Jennifer tried to remember a certain Oliver, but to no avail. "Yes, my son. He's just visiting me right now. He came back from his shift, and instead of going to his place, he's staying with me for the time being. Either he had a fight with his wife, or he just doesn't want to go home. Anyway, come to my place. He was supposed to chop wood today. And he'll give you some wood and help you with the stove." Jennifer thanked her neighbor and almost ran to her house. The thought of returning to a house that looked more like a huge glacier did not please her at all. "I don't want to fall down in these parts," Jennifer thought. "There are no proper hospitals here, no way to get a full checkup." Oliver was home. When Jennifer saw him through the fence, she didn't immediately recognize him as the boy she had once run to the river with. They had been 14 years old then. The boy seemed overly bold and brave, and he was a real bully. "And I recognized you straight away," Oliver smiled. "Remember when you almost drowned? And I saved you." Jennifer laughed. "I didn't drown. You didn't save me? You pushed me into the river yourself. but now you could very well save me. My cooker doesn't work in my house, and I have no idea how to use it. Will you help me?" Oliver agreed. Together they worked out how to use the cooker properly. Then they drank tea, laughing and reminiscing about their childhood and their childhood mischief. Afterwards, they discussed mutual acquaintances, about whose fate Oliver knew much more than Jennifer, who had lived in the regional center for a long time. Then the topic drifted to a discussion of her own personal life. Jennifer didn't go into details, only briefly told him that she had left her husband and would now try to start a new life. "But you're a risk-taker," Oliver said admiringly. "To take a sudden change like that, I don't think I'm capable of that at all." "You don't know the details, that's why you think that way," Jennifer replied sadly. Before she knew it, she was talking to her childhood friend, and they sat there until lunchtime. The house was warm and cozy, and she didn't want to stop talking to such an interesting person. Jennifer suddenly realized that over the many years she had been married to Winston, she had completely forgotten what long, intimate conversations were like. After all, in the last few years, Winston was always busy. He had neither the time nor the inclination to talk to his wife. He must have discussed all the interesting things with Maggie, Jennifer thought bitterly, sinking back into her sad thoughts. "And why are you stuck at your mother's? Why aren't you going home?" Jennifer asked Oliver to distract herself from the realization of the worthlessness of her past life. Oliver shrugged. "Honestly, I'm afraid to. My wife recently had a baby and I don't feel like I can handle it." Jennifer raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You're afraid you won't be able to handle your own child? Are you serious?" Oliver nodded. "Seriously. Why?" "I'm a regular working man. My hands aren't made for this. When I pick up a pram, God forbid I drop it or push it. I'm afraid. Anyway, so I've been stalling. I fixed my mother's shed, rebuilt the roof. I'm thinking, what else can I do so I can go on shift right afterwards without going home?" "Oliver, it doesn't work that way." Jennifer shook her head. "You put yourself in your wife's shoes. How does she feel? What does she think about you not going home? Her hormones are already raging right now. She's having a hard time, not getting enough sleep with a small child. And you didn't even come and see him? You want to, don't you?" Oliver nodded, lowering his head. "I want to, but I'm afraid to." "You're a big man, and you're afraid of a small, helpless baby. Oliver, come on, you have a little brother, don't you? You spent your whole childhood with him, carrying him everywhere. Your mom almost left you with him forever. Nothing happened." "I wasn't thinking straight then," Oliver said. "I didn't have much choice. My parents made me do it. Now no one does." "Yeah," Jennifer grinned. "Did you ever think about the fact that your stressed-out wife is going to take it upon herself not to let you on the doorstep when you finally get the courage to do it?" Oliver looked at Jennifer, and his eyes grew wider and wider. "Why wouldn't she let me in? I'm the husband." "And where are you now? Are you the husband? Why are you sitting here? Not with your family, doing everything you can to avoid seeing your wife and child, Oliver?" "But she has every right to do the same, to never see you," Jennifer said. Oliver fell silent. There was nothing for him to object to. The next day, though, when Jennifer met Rachel, she learned from her that Oliver had gone to stay with his family. Packed up all his things dramatically yesterday and ran for the bus this morning. Thank God his brains are back in place. And that stuck out at my place, and at home a small son with his wife. Even I was embarrassed. Jennifer smiled and said nothing. As she walked to the shop, she thought about the fact that she might have made a husband and wife closer by bringing something good into the world. Now that she wasn't treating her patients, and she'd fled the city in disgrace, leaving her patients for other doctors, she felt guilty. The situation with Oliver at least redeemed that guilt a little. Entering the shop, Jennifer looked disappointedly at the shelves. She realized that village grocery shopping was going to be a disappointment. The shelves were lined with cereals, sugar, salt, washing powders, and shampoos. And it was impossible to buy the usual meat, frozen vegetable mixes, and dairy products. "What are you going to buy?" Jennifer was approached by a shop assistant, and in her Jennifer recognized her childhood friend Chloe. She recognized her with great difficulty because Chloe had changed so much. She and Jennifer were about the same age, except that Chloe was 1 or 2 years older. but she looked in her 30s and tails for all 45. The woman was clearly a heavy drinker. Her face was haggard, her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking, as if Chloe had drunk a lot the day before. "Chloe, it's you. Isn't it?" Jennifer asked instead of answering, and the woman tightened her lips and nodded faintly. "Let's say it's me. What are you going to buy?" "I have a closing in 10 minutes, Chloe replied impolitely. "Ah, closing time," Jennifer grinned to herself. Behind Chloe's back, she saw an open bottle of vodka on one of the shelves and next to it a shot glass and sliced apples. Chloe was clearly not going to close up to finish the day's work, but to get a hangover. "You've just changed so much," Jennifer said, continuing to insist and watching the way Chloe's eyes raced. "And you smell so heavy in here." "It's spoiled goods. It stinks from the back room," Chloe replied quickly, and then threw her chin up defiantly. "What are you doing here? Telling me off? Buy your food and go back to your place." "Rude," Jennifer said in an even voice, not trying to take offense at her former mate. "It's not my fault you look 40 years old. You have kids, don't you? My grandmother told me." "Look, get out of here," Chloe shouted. She ran out from behind the counter and forcefully pushed Jennifer towards the exit. "You're going to teach me about life. Idea girl, teach others." "Chloe, if you need help, come to me," Jennifer managed to say before the shop assistant slammed the shop door in her face. Having not bought anything from the shop, Jennifer decided that she would drive to a nearby town. The snow on the roads was already melting. She needed time to buy groceries and change the summer tires for winter ones. When she returned home in the evening, she noticed a female figure at the gate of Julia's grandmother's cottage. In the darkness, it was hard to make out who it was. But then Jennifer realized it was Chloe, the same one who had pushed her out of her shop back in the morning. "Let's go inside," Jennifer said, holding out 2 bags to Chloe. "Will you help me carry the groceries in?" Chloe obediently followed Jennifer in. At first, they sat in silence. Then Jennifer put the kettle on, poured tea into mugs, placed vases of sweets on the table. "Try some, they're delicious. I know they're very rare here. I used to buy them for the kids." Chloe suddenly burst into tears. Her shoulders were shaking, and Jennifer, silently watching the woman sitting opposite, got up from her chair, poured water into a glass and handed it to her guest. "Help me," Chloe pleaded. "I can't stop. Since Ben died, I've been going downhill. I know I should stop, but I can't. It's like there's a force in me that makes me drink vodka. I drink it, but it doesn't get easier, and I keep dreaming about Ben, and the children crying, and I can't control myself," Chloe said through her tears. Jennifer nodded. "Okay, I'll try to help you. Firstly, you're going to buy some pills in town, you're going to take them, and if you drink after them, they'll take you to the hospital. Secondly, they'll dull your desire to drink. We'll go into town together tomorrow. We'll make an appointment for you to see a doctor there. You should definitely do that. I'll drive you myself, go with you to the appointment, because I suspect you won't have the courage or strength to do it yourself." Chloe looked at Jennifer with wet eyes, nodded occasionally, and sipped water from the glass. "Are you really going to help me? Is that what you want? I want your children to grow up to be normal people, not afraid of their mother and not see everything that happens to you. You don't think about them as much as you usually do." "But you do," Jennifer said with a smile and handed Chloe a candy bar. "Take it, eat it, stay at my place tonight. You'll do something stupid like you did this morning and you'll be sorry." A few days after this conversation, when Jennifer and Chloe had already gone to the city, together went to the hospital, and Chloe was scheduled for treatment, people came to Jennifer's house. They all had different problems. Someone wanted to be cured of excessive alcohol consumption. Someone was worried about back pain. Someone in the stomach. In general, Chloe, who worked in the only shop in the village, encouraged after seeing a doctor and receiving help from Jennifer, told all the other residents about the dependability of her new friend and the fact that she worked in the regional center as a therapist. Jennifer never said no to anyone. And now the house of Masha's late grandmother turned into a kind of outpatient clinic. They brought her vegetables, meat, chicken, eggs. Someone tried to slip Jennifer money, but she took only food. And that is a thank you from happy old ladies who received prescriptions for medicines and learnt that they had no deadly diseases. Then Sharon, the same one who worked at the local health center as a paramedic, came to Jennifer's house. "Enough of this nonsense, Jenny," she said. "Did you get your employment history? Go to town and get you employed. I'm retiring. I've already written my application. And you shouldn't be taking people in and treating them with pickles in your house." Jennifer nodded. Totally agree with what Sharon said. She was going to go to town with the paperwork herself, but Sharon beat her to the punch with her suggestion. 2 weeks later, Jennifer was taking appointments at the local nursing station. She often thought about her old life, but she had no regrets. She had too much work to do, which finally gave her a burst of energy and a desire to move on with her life. In the course of her work, she managed to file for divorce, then received a certificate of divorce. She went to the regional center twice and fortunately did not meet her ex-husband or her sister. In conversations with her mother, Jennifer carefully avoided the topic of her past life. She never asked about Maggie, and Marion tactfully left out how her sister and ex-husband Winston lived. Jennifer didn't know about it and didn't want to know. She guessed that both Maggie and Winston knew perfectly well that Jennifer lived in the settlement. Only neither of them had ever come to her, repented or apologized. In February in the township, as the blizzards began, they came one after another, and the local authorities, unaccustomed to such bad weather, were surprised that by the end of winter, this time of year was just beginning to gain momentum. "It's a wicked winter," explained one of the old ladies who came to see Jennifer. "It doesn't want to go away. It fights spring. We always have snowfalls in February, so much snow. It melts quickly, but it doesn't get swept away by the wind. Be well." Jennifer nodded. She still had much to learn about village life, which she was finally starting to get used to after a few months. The village was peaceful, quiet, and life flowed at a measured pace. Jennifer liked her job, and now she knew everyone in the small village. "Thank you, Julia," they often said to her, referring to her grandmother. "Raised such a wonderful granddaughter. A pleasure to us all." Jennifer smiled modestly, not commenting on the patient's words. It did make her happy to know that her grandmother spoke so well of her. It meant she had lived a life worth living. One snowstorm, Jennifer left work early. The patients were gone, and a real snowstorm was brewing outside her window. After closing the nurse's station, Jennifer trudged through the snowdrifts towards her home. As she approached, she noticed the open gate, but thought that it had opened because of strong gusts of wind. However, as she stepped up onto the porch, she saw the door to the house open. "What the hell is that?" she muttered as she approached the door, and then noticed a man's boots at the entrance. Her heart sank. As if in slow motion, she walked into the house and saw Winston sitting at the table. Turning around, he looked at her with an intimidated look, then gave her a strained smile. "Sorry, I'm uninvited." And Jennifer stopped in the doorway and leaned helplessly with her back against the door. It was unclear whether her strength had left her from the arduous journey home or because of her ex-husband's arrival. "Why did you come?" With difficulty moving her lips, she asked. "I came to beg forgiveness," he replied, rising from his chair. "I wanted to come sooner, but I lacked courage. Forgive me." Outside the window, the elements raged. Jennifer wanted to push Winston out the door, to slam the door in his face as Chloe had once done to her. But the blizzard was too frightening, and she wouldn't dare throw a man out into the weather and put his life in danger, even if she very much wanted to hurt someone who had once hurt herself. "I forgave you long ago," Jennifer replied. "I've already forgotten about everything, and I advise you to forget about everything. Live happily ever after," Jennifer said. "I even left myself to give you the opportunity to be a happy husband and father of your child." "Maggie is not pregnant by me," Winston replied. "I can't have children. All these years I haven't told you the truth. My first wife left me for that reason, and I was afraid of losing you, so I kept quiet. Maggie's pregnancy, by which she wanted to keep me, was a consequence of her frivolous life." Jennifer grinned. "You chose that girl, now take responsibility for it yourself. I don't want to know anything." Winston approached Jennifer and tried to take her hands, but she took a step backwards. Then he suddenly dropped to his knees, lowering his head and holding out his hands to his ex-wife. Jennifer cringed, seeing the pathetic picture before her. How many times had she imagined Winston begging her forgiveness? But now this moment had come, and she felt nothing but squeamishness and a desire to end this spectacle as soon as possible. "Come on, get off your knees, it won't do you any good," she said. "I realized exactly why you were here today. You took advantage of the bad weather so I couldn't kick you out, but it won't help you." Winston lifted his head and looked into her face. "Do you really like this life? Do you like living in the township, socializing with these uneducated and miserable people? You are a doctor with a capital letter." "Shut up," Jennifer interrupted him. "It's not for you to talk about how bad people live here. You're not known for your own integrity. And I could have been a doctor with a capital letter if I'd gone on to further study. You talked me out of it. Now I'm going to be a little doctor in this little village. I'm leaving. And I want you gone by the time I get back. You put the key back where you got it from." Jennifer walked out of the house, breathing heavily and gulping for air. It was hard to walk, the wind whipping in her face, filling her eyes with snow. But Jennifer didn't stop, stepping firmly through the loose snow. After a few minutes, having overcome a snowdrift almost a meter high, she knocked on the door of Chloe's house. Half an hour later, they were sitting at the table drinking tea. "So, did you really kick him out?" Chloe asked. "I asked him to go home. I didn't kick him out," replied Jennifer. "I can't live with a man who betrayed me once. If I do, I'll be constantly expecting him to betray me again. No, I can't do that. If my Ben were alive, I think I would forgive him for the sake of our children," Chloe said then, sobbing, and put her arm around Jennifer's shoulders, rocking her like a child. "We don't have children, and there's no point in our marriage," Jennifer replied. "Winston can't have children." After saying those words and looking at Chloe's 2 kids playing cars on the bed in the room, Jennifer smiled. She wants kids. She wants to live a happy new life where there will be no room for betrayal. It was necessary to wait a little while. And sooner or later, a big love was sure to appear in her little life. A mother of many children takes a job with a fading millionaire widower. And barely had she sat down at the piano. Marian looked at the note for what must have been the 10th time, rereading it. No, the handwriting was legible, but the content. "Marian, I'm sorry, but I can't go on like this. I've fallen in love with another woman, and today she and I are leaving for another city. Don't look for us. Tell the children I love them. Matthew." She slowly sat back in her chair and waved the note away, as if that little scrap of paper could provide some kind of coolness. "It just can't be." Marian muttered quietly. No, she'd noticed something strange going on with Matthew lately. She had noticed it, but she didn't want to believe it. It was true what they said about a husband cheating the wife would be the last to know. He told her he was working hard, that he was tired, that he was working late, that he was going out in the evenings and weekends. Even the kids seemed to have begun to suspect something. At least the eldest, Stephen, he's 14 now. Marian, at his age, would probably realize by now that her mom and dad don't like each other and are only together because they have nowhere to live separately. Of course, in front of the children, Marian pretended that everything was fine. "Daddy just works hard," she answered all their questions and smiled, trying to make it look believable. "He does it for us." She saw Stephen frown incredulously. He hadn't asked his mother anything, perhaps because he didn't want to bother his younger brother and sister. Or maybe he thought the adults would figure it out for themselves. Suspicions had plagued Marian for a long time. She tried to ignore them as best she could. Her blonde, long hair stuck to the front passenger seat of her husband's car. Though Marian's was dark walnut-colored and long past her shoulders, she wouldn't let it go. Long hair isn't practical when you have 3 kids. Just giving a lift to one of his colleagues, she thought. Was Marian thinking about hair or acquaintances? The smell of someone else's sweet feminine perfume from his clothes, the sound of a text message arriving on his phone at 2 a.m. Matthew, who'd been going to the bathroom for an hour at a time just to go have a beer with his friends. And his friends who hid their eyes if they happened to run into Marian. All of this she found an explanation for. Why, she thought, clutching the note in her hands. Why did I make excuses for him when it was so obvious? Just because I was used to trusting him, or because I've never cheated anyone myself? In 15 years of marriage, Marian had never once lied to Matthew, even about the smallest things. Or maybe she was just afraid of ruining their stable, steady world she'd grown so accustomed to over the years. "Don't wake trouble while it's quiet," Marian's grandmother was fond of saying. Marian didn't wake her up, just pretended everything was the same as before, until he decided to make the first move. "Mum, are we having dinner tonight?" Stephen came into the kitchen. He had always picked up her moods like radar, and now he knew at once that something was wrong with his mother. Marian twitched, tried to hide the note, but the son jumped to her in 2 steps, practically pulled the paper from his mother's hands, read it in a couple of seconds, sighed in a mature way, without surprise, as if he had long been prepared that such a thing could happen. "I see. Have you called him yet?" "Why?" "What do you mean, why?" The eldest son sat down next to me. Of all the children, he was the most like Marian, the same dark hazel hair, expressive green eyes and straight, neat nose. But unlike the soft Marian, Stephen was serious and sensible from childhood, as if he was preparing for the fact that he would have to become the head of the family. "We'll have to discuss divorce, alimony. Who will pay for the flat? We have a mortgage for another 5 years. You're probably right. We should just talk to him about it. I just don't believe it's real yet." His son sighed and put his hand over hers. "I know it's very difficult for you right now, Mum, but you and I both knew this was going to happen at some point. How long has he been cheating on you? 3 years? 5 years? Marian flinched as if struck by a blow. "I don't know. Let's not talk about it. You'd better call the younger ones. We must have supper." Stephen got up. "I'll get them." "You're not going to tell them yet?" "No. I'll contact your father first." Marian threw the note into the rubbish bin. Matthew didn't answer his phone or text messages. Marian even called him at work. They said Matthew had tendered his resignation a few days earlier, and they never saw him again. Marian also called some of his friends. They replied that they didn't know anything either. Only one of the mates, Alex, said that Matthew had told him about his plans to leave his wife and kids and run off with his mistress. "I thought he was joking," Alex sighed. "It turned out to be a joke." "You knew Matthew was cheating on me, didn't you?" Marian asked. There was silence in the phone for a few seconds, but then Alex answered. "Yes." "Okay," said Marian. "I understand. Thanks for telling me everything." She finished the calls, looked thoughtfully out the window. The children were already asleep, and now she had time to think and decide what to do next. After Molly, their youngest daughter, had been born 7 years ago, it was clear that Marian wouldn't be working for a long time. "And what are you going to do there?" her husband said then. "Even if you worked double shifts at your hospital, your salary wouldn't even be enough for 1 child, let alone 3. Marian sighed. She realized that nurses weren't paid that much. "Quit," Matthew continued. "Take care of the house and the children, and we'll have enough money." So she listened to her husband and resigned from the hospital where she had worked for many years. Of course, they were very upset. There was already a shortage of nurses, and there were very few responsible and careful professionals like Marian. She didn't really want to quit. She enjoyed her work, but it was difficult to combine it with caring for her husband and children. After she was fired, Marian didn't know where to put herself for the first time. She was used to being torn between her shifts, her husband, her children, and household chores. Only maternity leave was a rest for her, but only from work, because the rest of her duties were not canceled. Now she could take Molly and Alex to nursery in the morning and Stephen to school. On the way back, she had to go grocery shopping, then do the dishes, put the toys away, throw things in the wash, sweep and mop the floors. And then it was time to make lunch so that by the time it was ready, she could run to pick up the younger ones from kindergarten. Marian used to run to the school to pick up Stephen, but after the little sister started kindergarten, the eldest of the family protested. "I'm a big boy," he told his mother. "I can walk to school on my own." "You're only 9? Marian objected. Stephen only furrowed his eyebrows stubbornly. The school's near the house. You've got 2 kids to drag from kindergarten, and then you have to follow me. And I'm ashamed to walk with my mom, like a little kid, honestly. His mom sighed and agreed. Once Stephen had made up his mind about something, there was no changing his mind. In time, Marion fell into this cycle of home life and didn't even realize she'd ever worked. Matthew's money was enough for them. And her husband was satisfied with the fact that after work he had a clean house, a hot dinner, fed and washed children, and a wife who did not smell of chlorine and iodine. Only now Marion did not understand what she should do in this situation. She hasn't worked in 7 years. They live in a flat that still has a mortgage to pay for a few more years. The money they have now is only enough for a month at the most. If they cut back on all their expenses, 2 months. Of course, there was hope that Matthew would come to his senses and call. But her gut feeling told her that wasn't going to happen. And then what to do? Where do I get the money? Marion had no one to help her. She didn't know her father. Her mother never told her much about him. And her mom had died 5 years ago. We've got to get a job, thought Marion. Otherwise, we'll soon be on the street. The woman who sat across from her took another look at her CV and sighed heavily. She lowered her heavy metal-rimmed glasses closer to the tip of her nose. It was getting towards evening, and the employment officer wanted to finish the day and go home as soon as possible. And here was this misunderstanding, a 35-year-old mother of 3 minor children who had last worked 7 years ago as a nurse in a regular hospital. I don't know what to offer you, she said. I don't suppose you'd consider per diem or full-time work at all? Marion sighed and waved her hands. The woman snorted unhappily. Then I have nothing to offer you. Nothing at all? Marion clarified. No. Noticing the disappointed look on Marion's face, the woman said, I still have your phone number, and if anything comes up, I'll call you. Thank you, Marion replied, smiled, and walked out, carefully closing the door behind her. Already outside, when she got into her old black Toyota, which she had bought before her marriage, Marion exhaled slowly and leaned back in the driver's seat. It's okay, she said to herself. We'll make it. She mentally counted the money she had left there should be enough for another month. She had already cut back on her own expenses, but she didn't want to save money on the children. Though if she couldn't find a job, she'd have to cut back on their clubs and activities. She could also sell some of her things, especially expensive clothes or shoes. Marion didn't have any, but it would be possible to take the jewelry, laptop, and maybe the TV from the bedroom to a pawn shop for appraisal. All the jewelry, TVs, laptop, and even Marion's new winter boots that Matthew had given her last New Year's Eve had already been sold. They were very nice, but uncomfortable, and she'd hardly ever worn them. Then she remembered and decided to check how much they were worth. Turned out to be a fortune. Marion dropped the price by a quarter, and within a couple of hours, some happy woman took them. I spent 6 months looking for them in all the shops, she told Marion. Now all my girlfriends will be jealous of me. When she had gone, Marion breathed a sigh of relief. They could last another fortnight. What then? She had already cut every expense she could. There was nothing left to sell. Would she really have to settle for full-time work? What about the kids? Leave them alone from morning till night. Of course, Stephen's 14, Alex is 10, and Molly's 7. They're not toddlers. And the eldest has been telling his mother for a long time that he can handle the younger ones if she has to feed them, pick them up from school, make them do their homework. But does she have the right to put the responsibilities of adulthood on her boy's shoulders so early? The sound of the phone suddenly ringing almost made Marion jump. She wasn't expecting a call. And the number was unfamiliar. Normally she tried not to take such calls, but suddenly she thought that she was about to be told something good, because she was tired of bad news. I'm listening, she said cautiously into the receiver, dreading the thought that she was about to be offered some kind of credit or told a story about a suspicious transaction on her card. But the pleasant female voice on the other end said something else. Marion, my name is Amanda. I got your number from the unemployment office. Are you still considering a job offer? Yes, Marion shouted hastily and then, ashamed of her impulsiveness, added more calmly, I'm still considering it. Good. Amanda seemed genuinely pleased. It says here that you've been a nurse for many years. You also have experience with critically ill patients. That's right, Marion replied. I would like to ask you if you would consider a job as a carer. Marion thought for a moment. She had never worked as a carer, but it was hardly more difficult than a nurse's job. If she'd ever handled an entire ward, she could certainly handle one seriously ill person. I can think about your offer, she said cautiously, but I'd have to know all the conditions. I'll be sure to tell you everything Amanda promised. Would it be convenient for you to come to my office at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? Yes, of course. Great. Then I'll text you the address. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye, Marion replied and pressed the end button. Her heart was pounding frantically for some reason. No, of course it was too early to rejoice, but at least one sentence had come to life again, and hope had been rekindled in her. After taking the children to school, Marion drove to her appointment. On the way, she once again ran through her mind the answers to all the questions she thought she might be asked. She also wrote out in notes on her phone what she wanted to find out for herself. Amanda's office was located right in the center of the city. A huge, modern business center. When Marion stepped into the new, shiny, almost silent lift, she thought that Amanda must be working for some very wealthy people. Good afternoon, she was greeted in the reception area by a pretty young girl. Amanda's secretary, I think. My name is Vivienne. I have an interview here at 10 o'clock, Marion informed her. For the position of a carer, she said sympathetically or surprisingly, but she pulled herself together and smiled politely. Please have a seat. I will clarify everything now. Marion sat down, and the secretary rang the telephone and asked something quietly and quickly into the receiver. The answer was apparently in the affirmative. Then Vivienne stood up, smiled once more at Marion and said, Amanda is expecting you. Come in. Marion was escorted to the door like royalty. For a second she was even frightened. A place like this wouldn't treat a mere nurse like that. Maybe she was confused. Hello, Marion said timidly as she entered the office. Amanda appeared to be a pretty woman about her age. Black hair, gathered in a neat low ponytail, business suit, expensive glasses. Good afternoon, Marion, she said. Please have a seat. She pointed with her hand to a cushioned armchair directly across from her. Marion sat down. Amanda smiled and clicked on the clipboard lying on the desk in front of her. According to our information, you have extensive experience as a nurse, including you indicated that you've cared for critically ill patients? Marion nodded. And you are also considering a position as a carer. Is that correct? That's correct, Marion confirmed. Good. I'm representing a client who needs a carer. Mr. Jacob has been paralyzed from the waist down for a number of years, and he has several other cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive problems. Marion nodded again, showing she was listening intently. From a physical point of view, your job would not be considered hard, Amanda continued. The whole house is equipped for Mr. Jacob's needs. Motorized wheelchairs, lifts, handrails, and so on. There'll be no complicated medical procedures, either shots, pills, IVs, etc. Nothing a nurse couldn't master, I realized. Right, Marion said. Amanda paused, as if considering how best to present the next piece of information. Then she pressed her lip, as if she'd changed her mind about what she was going to say, and asked, I believe you have children? Yes, Marion nodded. 3. Amanda nodded thoughtfully. They're all in school, aren't they? Yes. So they'll be on holiday soon? Yes, in a couple of weeks. Are you considering accommodation? Amanda asked. Our client's house is out of town, and it would be inconvenient for you to go there every day. Marion shook her head. I don't have anyone to leave my children with, she said, frustrated and thinking she was going to be told goodbye. But suddenly Amanda spoke up. You don't have to leave them. You will live with them together in the grounds of the manor in the annex. To be exact, it's a detached building, very spacious, very cozy. I assure you, you'll like it. Marion looked at her incredulously. Are you saying that the four of us will just be allowed to live in a tenant's house? Amanda nodded and smiled happily. What's more, you won't even have to cook. The meals are free, as is the accommodation. You will be fed with the rest of the staff of the manor. Sounds tempting, Marion said cautiously. I'm beginning to suspect there's a catch. Exactly, Amanda confirmed cheerfully. I suppose you'd like to know the hours and wages? I would, said Marion cautiously. Amanda nodded. Her neatly manicured fingers ran across the screen of the tablet. She turned it toward Marion. Marion's eyes widened. This is for the week, Amanda explained. A week? Marion was even more surprised. That much money? Amanda sighed a little too humanly, which was very unlike her image of an impeccable business assistant. I realize you're expecting a catch. And there is, she said. Marion pressed her lips together, nodded slowly, and looked questioningly at Amanda. She rubbed the bridge of her nose tiredly. The thing is, Mr. Jacob is a very particular man, and he has a difficult temper. Not everyone can get along with him. Marion breathed out a sigh of relief. That's it? I've seen all sorts of people in my years at the hospital, and we've never been paid so much for being unhealthy. That's not quite all, Amanda shook her head. I can't promise you'll have a steady schedule. Roughly speaking, if Mr. Jacob thought of calling you in at 2 a.m., that would mean you'd have to get up and show up. But everything you've said so far is true, isn't it? Marion asked. Yes, the salary that I wrote you is paid once a week, because the staff doesn't usually stay there for a long time, Amanda answered. You and the children will live in a separate building and eat at the employer's expense. If you or the children need to go into town, we will provide you with a car and driver. And in return, I have to look after an elderly, capricious millionaire, and be ready to appear at his beck and call at any moment. You could say that Amanda nodded. I am ready, said Marion. When can we start? It took them a while to complete the paperwork. Then Marion waited until the children were on holiday. Finally, they packed all the necessary things and drove to the manor to the mysterious Jacob. Are you sure he's not some kind of freak? Alex asked her. We're all going to his place. We don't know where to go. Marion blushed. They were traveling in a car with a driver sent directly by her employer. She looked in the mirror and saw that the driver, who introduced himself as Marcus, was smiling. Alex, we're not going somewhere. We're going to an upmarket village, Marion said indignantly. Jacob is normal, please, nothing extra. If you have to meet Jacob, you realize how important this job is to me. Jacob will probably only get to know you, Marcus said. He doesn't like new people very much, and he wanted me to bring you straight to the outhouse. I see, replied Marion. A short time later, they entered the village. Wow, Alex commented. If there are crazy people living here, they are very rich. Stephen laughed, and Molly nearly broke the glass she had pressed her forehead against to get a good look. Yes, thought Marion, there are some very rich people living here. They drove past huge mansions surrounded by large fences. That's nothing, Marcus said cheerfully. You haven't seen Jacob's main house yet. The next one will be more interesting, Marcus said. After they had driven through the village, there was a large area surrounded by a beautiful, elegant, but very high fence. The driver pressed some button on a small black remote control that appeared in his hand, and the gate opened. We are now entering the grounds of the manor, Marcus commented. They drove for a long time along the road, which was surrounded on both sides by rows of neatly trimmed trees. Then a huge modern house, made of glass and metal, appeared in front of them. But the car did not go towards the mansion, but turned left. A few minutes later, they stopped in front of a small, neat wooden house. Marion and the children got out of the car. It's beautiful, said Marion. This outhouse must be very old. Marcus, who had also got out of the car and was already taking their suitcases out of the boot, replied. Yes, it was built more than half a century ago. But don't worry. The outbuilding was restored only recently, about 2 years ago. There's water, electricity, everything. It looks like something out of a 19th century novel, said Stephen. That's right, the driver replied, coming up to the porch with his suitcases in his hands. I don't know exactly, but I think that was the idea. When they went inside, Marion noticed that, despite the seeming compactness of the outbuilding, it was very spacious inside. There was a small entrance hall, which almost immediately led into a living room, apparently connected to the kitchen dining room. A spacious en-suite bathroom, and, most importantly, 4 bedrooms. Wow, Alex shrieked. Am I going to have a separate bedroom? Marion smiled. Apparently, yes. In the old flat, the brothers had shared a room, and only Molly had her own bedroom. Stephen looked at his mother and smiled. He's all grown up now, isn't he? Suddenly, Marion thought that he needed his own room for a long time. Meanwhile, Marcus had already brought in all their things and said, "Make yourselves comfortable, have a rest. I think in about an hour they'll be here to take you to lunch. You'll get to know everyone there." "Thank you, Marcus," Marion said sincerely. He smiled. "It was nice to meet you all. I hope you enjoy your time here and stick around." In the hour they had, everyone had time to put their things away and settle into their new place of residence a little. Alex and Molly even ran around the outhouse. There they found a gazebo, a swing, and some well-tended flower beds. "Mummy, I love it here," Molly exclaimed, running up to Marion and hugging her legs. Marion smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. "I'm very glad," she said. "I hope you won't be bored here." "Not while you're working," the younger one said confidently. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. "Yes, come in," Marion answered. A tall, blonde-haired man with brown eyes walked into the cabin. He was dressed simply in a white t-shirt and black jeans, but he held himself so freely and confidently that Marion immediately realized that this man plays not the least role here. "Good afternoon, everyone." The first thing the stranger said was, "Hello. My name is Robert. I'm Jacob's assistant and the manager of this house." "Nice to meet you," she said. "My name is Marion, and these are my children, Stephen, Alex, and Molly." "Hello," they said in unison. Robert smiled. "It's a pleasure. I'm sure you will revitalize our sleepy kingdom. Now I invite you all to lunch." He led them down an inconspicuous path that led to the side entrance of the mansion. Through this door, they passed into a large and cozy kitchen. "Here are our newcomers." A woman's voice greeted them cheerfully. Marion saw a short, slightly overweight woman in her 50s. "I'm Camila," she said. "I am in charge of the food in this house. Come to the table." Marion introduced herself and the children, and they were seated at the table. There were about 10 other people besides them. They were all employees of the manor. They introduced themselves to Marion, but she was so nervous that she couldn't really remember anyone, just smiled and nodded. At Marion's right hand sat Robert. "Don't worry," he whispered in her ear. "You'll remember everyone in a couple of days." "How do you know what I was thinking?" Marion asked. "It's not difficult," replied Robert. "When I came to work here and everyone was introduced to me, I thought the same thing." Marion grinned. Her first fear had receded. Everyone seemed to be very nice and friendly here. Also, the kids were very well behaved after they ate lunch. Robert took Marion to meet the supervisor, and Marcus volunteered to give the children a tour of the estate. When Robert and Marion stopped in front of the office door, her employer's assistant began to speak softly, looked her in the eye, and said, "Marion, remember the most important thing: any comments Jacob will let slip about you have nothing to do with you personally. He is just an old, sick man with a hard fate and a very bad temper. In fact, that's why we're willing to give you such a great salary and facilities." "Thank you for telling me, Robert. But don't worry, I'm tougher than I look." "I'm sure you are." Then he knocked and opened the door. At last came a creaky, aged voice. "I thought I was going to die in here before any of you bothered to come in. I wonder why I pay you, all you bums, so much money." In a chair by the window sat an old, hunched old man. Marion thought that this was the kind of man they drew in books when they described an orphan protagonist who lived with an evil old relative. It was obvious that Jacob used to be a tall, sturdy man. Though the years had dried him up and pulled his head to the ground, his shoulders were still broad and even a little proud. Short gray hair, wrinkled neck, stubble, long straight nose, tightly closed lips, and angry, prickly eyes. They must once have been blue or green, but now they had faded so much that it was impossible to tell. And with those eyes he studied Marion coldly. It was as if Marion was being scanned, checking what was inside her. "Is it this one?" Jacob asked Robert, ignoring her completely, as if Marion herself were incapable of answering him. "That's Marion," the assistant answered. "She will be your new nurse." "Hello," said Marion, deciding that she would not stand here waiting to be addressed. Jacob frowned as if he'd eaten something sour. "Yes," he said, "it gets worse every time. Come on, Robert, let's go see what we can do with her." The assistant smiled encouragingly at Marion and went out. Without Robert, Marion immediately felt somehow defenseless, but she was determined that she would not let her charge spoil her mood. She needed this job. She liked the bright, spacious outhouse they were put in. She liked being able to spend quality time with the children. She liked the fact that she didn't have to go anywhere, and she certainly wasn't going to be leaving here in a week. So Marion pulled herself together, smiled, and said, "Well, where do we start? How about a shave for starters? Otherwise you look very overgrown, not like a millionaire, but like a homeless man." Oh, why did I say that she immediately thought in horror? I wanted to say something else about my skills, about what a highly skilled nurse I am. Now he's going to fire me for sure. Jacob raised his bushy gray eyebrows in surprise and suddenly laughed like a madman. "Like a homeless man, you say?" he said, when he could laugh. "Well, take me to the bathroom, if that's the case." "Where's your bathroom?" she asked. The old man rolled his eyes. "Yeah, that's professionalism in all its glory," he grumbled. Then he pressed a button on the arm of the chair, and it went somewhere along the line. All she had to do was follow him. Jacob led her into a large, airy room. It took Marion a few seconds to explore the place and marveled at how conveniently everything was arranged. She found a cape, shaving foam, and a clipper. "Do you even know how to do that?" Jacob asked her doubtfully. "I do," Marion said calmly. The last time she had used a clipper had been a long time ago, when she was still working at the hospital. One of her patients had asked her to shave his neck before an operation. He couldn't do it himself, his hands were too shaky. "That's all right," thought Marion, "I can do it now." When she had finished, she looked with satisfaction at the result of her work. "There," she said, turning her ward to the mirror. A different look. Jacob saw himself and gasped. "What have you done, you fool?" he shouted. "Couldn't you at least leave a few millimeters? Why cut everything to 0? You can see all my wrinkles and folds. I look like I'm about to die." Marion looked in the mirror, but decided not to show fear. "It's hygienic," she said sternly. "And it suits you better, believe me, as a woman." The old man chuckled. "Any man has ever been a woman." Marion's face seemed to flush. Yes, she had come here in a simple dress, with her hair unsightly in a ponytail, but to take her for an old maid was too much. "Don't worry," she said dryly. "I have 3 children." Jacob whistled. "And from different men, too." "One," Marion said wryly. "But he's an interesting guy, having 3 kids and a woman to work with." Marion pressed her lips together. "We broke up." "Why are you panting like that? Did you run away?" "That's none of your business," she said more sharply than she intended. "What's next on the plan?" "Snake, get the clipboard from the table," the old man grumbled. Marion should have left a detailed schedule there. The tablet was found in the indicated place. Marion ran her eyes over it. Yes, there's a lot to do. It seems that Jacob is indeed seriously ill, at least judging by the number of pills and shots he gets every day. "Have you had lunch yet?" she clarified. "No, I was waiting for you." "Of course I've had lunch, I see." Marion decided not to react to the abruptness. Then you have rest and IVs now, she said. You're a genius. Jacob pulled the tablet down so his fingers shared the screen but said nothing. Are we going to drip lying down or standing up? How many more stupid questions are there going to be today, Marion thought. Marion, hardly gritting her teeth, answered. There will be questions until I fully understand your regimen and appointments. For your information, some patients prefer to sit during the procedure. I'm thrilled for them. We're laying on you, she continued, ignoring the sarcastic tone, which means there should be a couch. Marion began to look round. The old man sighed and nodded his head. There's a door over there that leads to the treatment room. The IV went relatively quietly, too. Marion was afraid she wouldn't get into a vein the first time after all. It had been years since she'd injected. But today she was lucky. Jacob even closed his eyes and dozed off. He woke up when she was pulling the needle out of his vein. We're going for a walk now, Marion said. Really, said the old man. I thought it was a tambourine dance. Marion wondered how she had so much patience. She was used to strangers being so rude and disrespectful to her, for just doing her job. Jacob hired her for this job, if you think about it. It's understandable that she wouldn't know anything on the first day. Can't she have a little self-restraint? Marion thought as she walked through the garden beside his chair. Why should he? He's a millionaire. He's not used to restraining himself. He must have had more than one carer before her. And if she fails or decides to leave, his team will find another one the same day. In the meantime, he can just take his anger out on people like they're his punching bags. During the walk, however, Jacob was a little quieter. It was as if he was immersed in his own memories, not paying attention to Marion, who was walking beside him. He just rolled along the paths, automatically switching buttons to turn in the right direction. He doesn't really need me right now, Marion thought. He can ride on his own. The paths are perfect everywhere. But according to the terms of the contract, I must accompany him at all times and never leave him alone. I wonder if you like that kind of work, Merlin, Jacob asked suddenly. I'm Marion, she corrected. I don't care. It's just a job, a normal job. He chuckled. You don't say. I have a lot of my own companies, employing thousands of people. If I wanted to, I could buy up all the houses in this village. That's a proper job. You can leave me at the barb, the old man continued through gritted teeth. If you stay, you'll do a lot of other, less pleasant things. Isn't that what you dreamed of at school? Marion felt herself getting really angry. I don't know why you started this conversation, she said honestly. Jacob grinned. Aren't you ashamed of yourself in front of the kids? You're a grown woman, working as a nurse. You don't even have to be smart about it. Just do as you're told. A monkey could do it. Or is that all you're not clever enough to do? If the monkey could do it, why do you change carers so often? Marion asked. Maybe it's because you don't treat them like people, but like animals. I think I'd agree that chimpanzees or gorillas would be a better fit. At least they wouldn't understand how you treat them. The old man laughed. I'm a millionaire. Manners don't suit you, princess. You can leave even today. I'll even ask Robert to pay you a week's salary in advance. For a second, Marion wanted to take the money, grab the children, leave and never see this arrogant, nasty old man who treats her like some baron with servants. No, she said to herself, that's what he wants, and I'll never get another job like that. Marion remembered how many CVS she'd sent, how many times she'd been rejected, how many evenings she'd sat thinking about what else she could sell to pay the mortgage and food. I'm fine with it, she said cheerfully to Jacob, and even found the strength to smile. We've got dinner and evening treatments coming up, so I think you should turn your vehicle in the opposite direction. Marion had been working for Jacob for a fortnight now, and every day she felt like she couldn't hate the man more. And every new day he proved her otherwise. The old man always found something to pick on about Marion: her appearance, her voice, her gait, words spoken with the wrong accent. Once she got overexcited and didn't get into his vein the first time. He remembered it for 3 days. Marion was shaking with unfair resentment, anger, and most of all, powerlessness. She realized that Jacob was aware of her predicament and was taking advantage of it. He was used to power, used to being first in everything, to being obeyed, to being feared. and now he is just a pathetic sick grandfather who is left all alone. Having plucked up courage, Marion once asked Robert if their boss had a wife and children. As far as I know, he replied, no children, but he had 4 wives. 4? Marion gasped. Yep, the first one he married when he was very young. I think she was from a rich family. Did he work for her father then, or did they have a business together? I don't know exactly. It was kind of a marriage of convenience. Jacob worked hard. His father-in-law noticed him and helped him start his own business. When the boss got big enough, he didn't need his wife, so he filed for divorce. Then there was some model about 10 or 15 years younger than him, Robert continued. They lived with her for a while, 3 or 4 years. Then he caught her cheating on him and divorced her too. And the third, as far as I know, left him. She was also some young and beautiful girl who got bored with him. Gee, sighed Marion. And the fourth was already some old friend of his. They were the same age and had been friends for a long time. They'd married when they were both in their 50s. Both he and she had a few divorces under their belts. She was the one they seemed to have a good life with. But she died about 5 years ago of cancer. Oh, that sounds sad, said Marion. People who've been here longer than me say that's when he got the way he is now. He was supposedly quite tolerable before. No angel, of course, but he could live. Now he's getting worse every day. Marion sighed. That's a very sad way of putting it. Doesn't he have any relatives? Robert shrugged. There seems to be a sister who has children and grandchildren of her own, but they live abroad and rarely come here. He's a very lonely man, said Marion. It's sad to be so ill, living alone in a huge house. Aha, replied the steward. So he takes out his poison on those around him. Every evening Marion looked forward to the end of the working day. Then she could finally live for herself, spend time with her children. They had settled in quite well, by the way. All the staff were very friendly to Stephen, Alex, and especially little Molly. Camila took care of them, feeding them goodies. Marcus, with Marion's permission, took the children for rides with him if he went somewhere not far away on the chief's errands. The boys had mastered the grounds of the manor with its huge garden and many beautiful quiet corners. The only thing they tried to do was to keep out of sight of the master of the house. It wasn't that hard, though. Jacob only went for walks when Marion was with him. It was usually in the morning, and only sometimes in the afternoon or late afternoon. A fortnight later, Marion was reminded for the first time that she had an irregular working day. She and the children had long since gone to bed when Marion's phone suddenly rang. Robert's number came up. Yes, I'm listening, Marion mumbled sleepily. Marion, get in the house right away. Jacob's having a seizure. Marion jumped up on the bed. She was wide awake. She had been warned that the ward could have such attacks. In such a case, Marion should immediately run into the house and administer first aid. She didn't even bother to get dressed, just threw on a dressing gown over her nightgown and rushed into the house. The lights were already on everywhere, and frightened night maids and guards were running around. Marion made her way to the bedroom without wasting time. Jacob was half lying on the bed, breathing so heavily that she could hear him whistling and wheezing from a distance. Beside him stood Robert, who had put the supervisor in, opened the windows, now pulling out anything Marion might need. She nodded gratefully to the manager and set to work. She put the oxygen mask on Jacob's blue face and started the oxygen supply. Then she quickly found the vials in the medicine cabinet, filled the syringes, and administered the injections. Fortunately, the attack was not severe, and the medicine began to take effect quickly. Marion watched carefully as the old man's pulse evened out, his breathing recovered, and his complexion returned to normal. There, she said, "It's all right, Jacob." The old man nodded and gave a hoarse squeeze. "For someone who's just been hoofing it, that'll do." "You should have some hot tea with mint or linden now," Marion said. "I'll have them make it for you." "Yes," said the chief. "And I have one more favor to ask of you. Will you do it?" Marion nodded. "Yes, of course. What is it?" "Next time move faster, or you'll be dead before you get there." Marion felt all her pity, which she had just felt. watching the old man suffering a seizure, as if blown away by the wind. "I'll do my best," she replied discreetly. "I'll go and tell him about the tea." A minute after Marian had asked for tea to be made, Robert came into the kitchen. "How are you?" he asked. "All right." "That's just the way he is. He'll play the villain to the last, even when he's dying." Marian asked. "I think that's what he is." The steward sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "You know," he said in a confidential tone, "I sometimes think that the chief isn't really like that. It's just that at some point he's decided that this is the only way to communicate with the world, and he's afraid to act human." Marian shrugged her shoulders. "A noble theory, Robert, but I'm sorry, I'm sure he's being sincere." Robert smiled. "How about some coffee?" he suggested. "No, I'd rather go to bed." "Good night." "Good night, Marian." The next day, when Marian and the children came for breakfast, Robert made an unexpected announcement. "Marian, you have the day off today." "Why is that?" she wondered. The manager shrugged his shoulders. "The chief said so. His sister and her children are visiting him. Apparently they'll look after him." Marian frowned. "And the injections? IVs?" Robert waved his hand. "Don't worry, we call a nurse from the private clinic for such cases." "Why doesn't she come every day? Why should I?" Marian didn't understand. "The boss doesn't like new people." Camila suddenly intervened in their conversation with a smile. "He was just putting the children on the second portion of pancakes, so he demands that there should be one constant. Someone who knows all his habits." "I see," Marian replied. "That's why he drives people crazy and makes them quit," she added mentally. "And it's more pleasant to abuse a permanent slave than nurses from a private clinic who will be different every time." But she didn't want to say it out loud in front of the kids. Let them think she had a good job. "We've almost all got the day off," Marcus added. "If you don't mind, Marian, and you guys too. I can take the kids to the zoo and then we can go out for lunch on the way," Marcus said. "Yes, Uncle Marcus," Molly shouted happily. Of the three, she was most attached to the young, cheerful driver, who always paid attention to the children. "No, my good ones," Robert said firmly. "Marcus has the day off and I can't force you on him." The driver waved his hand. "Don't worry, Robert," he said. "I'm going there with my nephew anyway. He's 10, and I'll take yours with me, too. It won't be a problem." Marian looked at the children doubtfully. "We'll behave," Alex said, looking at his mother pleadingly. The eldest shrugged his shoulders, saying that if necessary he would go. Marian never worried about his behavior. "All right," she sighed. "Then I'll go get the money." "No need," Marcus replied. "The chief always leaves money for such small expenses." The others present nodded. "Don't even worry about it," Camila assured her. After breakfast, Marcus and the children went to the garage to start the car and drive to the zoo. Robert and Marian were the only ones left. "Do you have plans for the day off?" the assistant asked Marian. "I don't know. I should probably go into town, see how the flat is." Robert perked up. "Do you want to go for a ride together? I've got a couple of chief cases to take care of. It won't take long, and then we can see your flat. And we can have lunch on the way back if you don't mind." "Yes, that's all right," said Marian. Robert was easy and comfortable with her. He could keep up a conversation without being intrusive. He talked interestingly about the things he was doing now, but did not spill too much. Marian suddenly realized how little she had ever had such simple human companionship in her life. After she quit her job, all she had left in her life was her husband and children. Sure, there were her friends from college and work, but they had their own lives, husbands, kids, jobs. And they didn't get to see each other very often. And after Matthew left, she'd lost herself. Constant thoughts of how to find a job, how to pay the rent, worrying about how her children would feel about their father leaving. There was no time for herself. "How long have you been working for Jacob?" she asked Robert. He thought for a few seconds. 5 years. That's a long time. Well, if you don't count me, I'm hardly the newest guy in the house. Wow, how you're all holding up. Is there a secret? Or was the manager not like this before? The manager laughed. When I came, he was perhaps a little gentler, but he wasn't particularly kind. I won't hide it. He's not easy for me either. I can imagine, said Marion, sighing. Robert smiled. For the first 6 months I wanted to quit, probably 7 times a day, then a little less often. Now I don't think about it at all. Why not? Marion frowned. Salary, of course, it plays its part too. Not the last, but not the first. What else? Marion wondered. Robert is so clever, so confident. He must be a good professional and, unlike her, could find many more excellent jobs. Experience, Robert said. I not only run the house, but I help Jacob run his business remotely. Don't look so weak and decrepit. He's got a pretty good head. Marion wasn't sure, but she decided not to argue. And now I'm unlikely to find another job where I can watch how to manage such a huge amount of money, the assistant continued. Understand? I do, said Marion. Except that your life keeps revolving around Jacob. Don't you feel sorry for yourself? Your wife and children hardly ever see you at home? Robert laughed. I guess I don't look very young, he replied. But I'm only 33. Marion was confused. I don't know what you mean, she admitted. And you look wonderful. Thank you. May. I'm flattered. It's not every day I get compliments from such beautiful young women, Robert said. I mean, I don't have a wife or children yet. A fiancé? Marion asked. No, no girlfriend. I see that looks suspicious, laughed Marion. A little, Robert admitted. I'm just a workaholic. I want to start a family when I'm sure I can provide for them. By the way, we're here. It'll be 15 minutes in the rain. Then we'll see your flat. Of course, Marion replied. Robert took some folder with documents and went out. Marion was left alone in the car. She suddenly thought that perhaps, like Robert, she would be tied to this house and the mean old man for years to come. Okay, it's summer now. What about in the autumn when the kids go to school, she pondered. Marion suddenly realized that Amanda, who had hired her, hadn't talked to her about the matter, most likely because she hadn't counted on Marion holding out this long. And Marion has, and she's not going to quit. No, Jacob can't wait, she thought, biting her lip painfully, remembering last night. She'd been truly afraid for him then, and for the first time since then, sorry. As soon as he could breathe, he'd snapped at her. Robert came back and interrupted her sad thoughts. He looked pleased. What? Let's go to your place, he asked. Let's go. Marion replied. Everything was fine in her flat, too. It was as unlikely as anything could happen, but Marion was still more used to being in control. Lunch now. Robert said cheerfully, I'll show you a lovely place. But I don't think they cook as well as our Camila does. Oh yes, sighed Marion. Nothing can compare to her food. But I'll try to surprise you. Robert took her to a large Georgian restaurant on the top floor of a large shopping center. There was pleasant national music playing. The air conditioners were running at full blast, which was especially nice after a hot summer day. They were escorted to a table with 2 soft sofas right by the window. From there they had a view of the river and the new high bridge. Would you mind if I chose for you? Robert asked. Go ahead, Marion replied cheerfully. I don't know anything here anyway. Fine, Robert replied. When the waiter came, Robert pointed his finger at several items on the menu without showing Marion. So she didn't know what to expect. She was surprised when the first thing she got was a glass of red wine. It's only lunchtime, she reminded her companion. So? Robert asked. Marion sighed because she couldn't find any other arguments. Aren't you going to have any? She inquired. I'm driving. Definitely not, Robert replied. The wine was both moderately sweet and tart. Marian savored the taste and suddenly thought she couldn't remember the last time she had sat like this and spent time quietly with a glass of wine. "Thank you," she said. "This is the most wonderful weekend I've ever had." Robert smiled. "Wait to thank you," he said. "The food hasn't arrived yet." Marian liked the food very much. The soft, hot dough of the khachapuri with the slightly difficult-to-stretch cheese, the salad with crisp mini aubergines and lots of greens, the flavorful meat, and the juicy sauces. "Oh," she said, leaning back on the soft back of the couch. "That was wonderful." "I'm very glad," Robert replied. He was leaning back and apparently unable to move either. "It seems that it will take us some time to recover," Robert remarked. Marian nodded lazily and took a sip of wine. "I fully support it," she said. "In the meantime, we can talk." Robert raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That sounds scary," he said. Marian laughed. "I'm not your wife to make it sound scary." "Not yet. Anyway, I'm listening." Marian laughed. For some reason, she felt very light and good. "Tell me about yourself," she asked, and then confessed, "You're a mystery to me." "That's quite a confession," Robert grinned. "Why is that?" I wondered. "I just don't know anything about you," said Marian. "Neither do you about me," Robert remarked. "Fair enough. But let's start with you," Marian suggested. Robert chuckled. "Well, let's. I'm not from around here," he began. "I was born in a small town far, far away from here. Yes, I went to an ordinary village school. Lived in an ordinary family, but always had great ambition." Marian smiled. "So," Robert continued, "I decided to come here. It wasn't easy, but I managed. The student years were fun. Then I got a job second, third, fourth. Then I got to Jacob. Do you know the rest of it?" "I have a feeling you've left a lot out of your story," Marian said thoughtfully. "Who knows, maybe I'll tell you about it later," Robert said. "Now we need to talk about you." "Good. But I haven't got anything interesting either," admitted Marian. "I'm a local, but only my mum raised me. I never met my father, and my mum never told me much about him. She was a music teacher. So, as you know, we didn't live very well." "Did you go to music school?" Robert asked. Marian sighed. "It was a terrible 7 years of my life," she said. "I can only remember one tune now. Mum made me play it most often. Everything else has faded from my memory. I've played this one so many times that if you woke me up at 2 a.m., I could play it with my eyes closed." "What's the tune?" "Bach, Chopin, Tchaikovsky," Robert asked. "No, it's not classical for sure," replied Marian. "Honestly, I don't even know. Mum never told me who the author was. We certainly didn't study it at school. I have a theory that she composed it herself, but I can't say it's true." "Well, go on," said Robert, and then he interrupted himself. "Do any of your children go to music school?" "No one," Marian cut him off. Robert laughed. "Shall I order you some more wine?" She shrugged, and Robert asked for another glass. "Unlike you, I didn't do very well at school," she continued. "The only thing I could count on after high school was college. And for some reason I suddenly decided I wanted to be a nurse. I thought it was a very beautiful, noble, and romantic profession," said Marian. "It is," Robert agreed. "Not a bit of it." Marian sighed. "No, I don't regret it. Studying was interesting and so was working. It was at work that I met Matthew, my husband. He was a patient of yours." "Yeah, I'd just started working. I didn't really know how to do anything on my own. I remember my hands shaking when I was giving injections or dressings. I thought I could see it from a mile away. But Matthew didn't notice." Robert smiled. "I'm sure he fell in love with you at first sight." "He said he did," Marian nodded. "In fact, I liked him too. Soon we started seeing each other, and 6 months later we were married. And then I found out I was pregnant." "You've become a very young mum," Robert smiled. "Yes, of course it was difficult at first. But then Mum was still alive and she helped me a lot," said Marian and sighed. Then Stephen grew up and went to kindergarten. I went to work, but not for long. When he turned 4, I got pregnant with Alex. And 3 years later, Molly was born. Wow. After Molly was born, we decided I was going to stay at home. That's why I didn't work for 7 years. Wow, Robert said. I must say you're doing a wonderful job, especially after such a break. Marian smiled. Thank you. That's nice to hear. Can I ask you a personal question? Ask away, she nodded to Robert. Marian took another sip of wine. Why did you separate from your husband? Robert asked. Why did I leave my husband? She asked him again. Yes, he left me. Maybe the wine played a part. Maybe it's been a while, but it's the first time I've ever made that confession so easily. He just left a note saying he was in love with another woman, she explained. He didn't even talk to you, Robert wondered. Marian shook her head. What about the children? He didn't even say goodbye to them either? How awful, Robert exclaimed. Marian smiled. I don't know what you mean. What horror. It's all right, she said. I'm fine now. Is that why you're holding on to this job? Robert guessed. Exactly, Marian nodded. They were silent for a few minutes. Each was digesting everything that had been said in the dialogue. Then Marian asked, What about your personal life? You're only 2 years younger than me. I can't believe you haven't had a serious relationship. Robert smiled kind of sadly. I have, and for quite a long time. I started dating an ambitious girl when I was still in college. I had that quality too. Only our goals were different. My ambitions were career-related, and hers were to find a successful man. Aren't you a successful man? Marian asked in surprise. Thank you for saying that. It's hard for me to judge that myself. Then I tell you that you are a successful man, interrupted Marian. Much obliged, Robert replied. Well, anyway, my beloved did not consider me a successful man, and she broke up with me because she said she was worthy of more. A very stupid woman, commented Marian. After that statement, I'm obliged to pour you more wine, Robert said, indicating to the waiter to repeat himself. Oh, sighed Marian, I haven't drunk so much in a long time. So Robert continued. She left me, and I decided that I would become the successful one, and she would come back to me. And how did it go? Marian asked. Great. In the process, I realized that I don't want to be with a woman for whom I'm not good enough, for whom I'm important not as a person but as a social status. Marian nodded. And I don't want to be with a man who gave birth to 3 children. And then he left, leaving only a note on the table, she confessed. Robert smiled sadly. I fully support such a wise decision. In the morning, Marian woke up with difficulty. Her head ached and her mouth was dry. The light of the sun shining through the curtains seemed unbearably bright. I overslept, she thought with horror. And I probably didn't even set my alarm clock last night. The clock, however, showed it was still early. Marian showered, brushed her teeth. After making sure the children were still asleep, she slipped quietly out of the outhouse and into the house. Camila was already bustling about in the kitchen. Oh, Marian. The woman greeted her cheerfully. Good morning. How are you up early this morning? Yes, said Marian hoarsely. It seems I had a very stormy day off yesterday. Camila smiled understandingly. Now everything will be. In an hour you will be awake and cheerful, like a 15-year-old schoolgirl. A minute later she put a huge cup of fragrant tea in front of Marian, smelling of berries and herbs. The best cure for a hangover, said Camila confidently. And eat this too. She set down a plate with a large sandwich with meat, lettuce, tomato and egg. This is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten in my life, Marian said blissfully as she ate her breakfast. You're magic. Thank you, Camila replied, embarrassed. By the beginning of the working day, Marian had recovered enough. Jacob had been unusually friendly today. Perhaps it was the meeting with his relatives, but he hardly commented on Marian's actions and did not make any derogatory comments. "You're remarkably quiet today," said Marian, as they went out for their traditional afternoon walk after lunch. "Don't let it get to you while it's quiet," Jacob said, but not in a mean-spirited way. "All right, I won't," Marian said. "Those are your children, aren't they?" He pointed to Alex and Molly, who were chasing each other around the fountain. Stephen was sitting on a bench, reading a book with one eye and watching the younger ones with the other. "Mine," replied Marian, horrified at the thought that she was about to be reprimanded, but her ward only nodded. "They're good, and they seem to be friendly." "Thank you," Marian replied cautiously. "Are you raising them alone?" Continued to show unexpected interest Chief. "I am now." "That's why you put up with me," Jacob said, realizing it was a statement, not a question. "I wanted to have many children when I was young, too," Jacob said suddenly. "It didn't work out." "You've been married 4 times, haven't you?" Marian asked in surprise, and then a twinge. It was hardly appropriate to know such information. But strangely enough, the chief did not comment on it. "Yes, he replied. Jacob stared ahead, as if he were mentally reviewing his whole life. "Didn't your first wife want children?" Marian asked. "Yes, I didn't at the time, either," Jacob answered. "She and I were young and spoiled. Both of us from rich families wanted to have fun and enjoy life. Or rather, my wife did. I was interested in building a business at the time." "So why did you get married?" "My parents insisted. It was good for the business. Actually, I didn't mind. She was a pretty girl. I thought I'd get used to her. Well, after a few years, it became clear that we were completely different people. I got divorced and went to work." He stopped talking. "Can I have some water, please?" Jacob asked suddenly. Marian hurriedly held out the bottle. "Please," she thought, wondering for the first time in weeks what was happening to him. Jacob sipped and continued. "I don't have much to say about my second, third wives. I married them, I don't know, just for status. Young, beautiful. I thought it would be great, but every time I realized quickly that it wasn't what I wanted. And all they wanted from me was money." He fell silent again. Marian held out the water, but the old man shook his head negatively. Then there was another situation. This is what could have been true love. "Your fourth wife?" Marian asked. "No, that was before her. I didn't marry that girl. It was a waste, as I thought many times afterwards, but I don't want to talk about it. It's too personal." "And what he's telling me now isn't too personal," thought Marian, but yet for some reason he chose to share it with her. "The fourth wife became more of a friend to me," Jacob said. "I already knew about her diagnosis when I proposed marriage." "Diagnosis?" Marian asked. "Yes, Samantha had cancer. In fact, she and I had known each other for years, too. Our parents had been friends since childhood. Over the years, we'd kept in touch from time to time, and then suddenly we met and talked and decided that we could spend a few years together." "Were you with her all the way to the end?" Marian asked. The man nodded. "She was a wonderful woman and a true friend. After she died, I didn't need anyone else," Jacob said. "I sympathize with you," she said sincerely. It was as if Jacob woke up. "You and I have been talking," he said. "Come on, let's go home. It's time for my evening pills." After this strange conversation, Marian felt sorry for her ward again. It couldn't be said that their communication improved much after that. Jacob could still speak harshly to her, but now she somehow took it easier. Summer was coming to an end, and Marian wondered what to do when the children went to school. "How do you like it here?" she asked them one day. "I like it very much. Ahead of the rest of them," Molly replied. "Aunt Amanda cooks good food. Uncle Marcus takes us everywhere. There's a big garden, so we can play all day long." "You have to go back to school soon," she reminded her daughter, who wrinkled her nose funny. "I don't want to go to school," she said. Marian sighed and looked at her middle son. "I like it here too," Alex said. But about school, I understand that, he smiled at Marian. You have to go to it. Thank God I understand you. The answer is accepted, Marian said. She shifted her gaze to her eldest son. I think you and I need to talk, Stephen said. Come on, Marian agreed. They went out into the garden. Stephen sighed. Summer's coming to an end, he said. We all have to go to school soon. We have to think about what to do about accommodation. Marian smiled. You've got a good eye for detail, as always. The son nodded. Dad called me the other day, he admitted. Marian's eyes widened. When a few days ago? Why didn't he call me? Afraid, I guess. But the official story is that he's very busy. I see, sighed Marian. What did he want? As I understand it, he wants to meet you, maybe to discuss the divorce, or, on the contrary, wants to make up. Marian laughed. Reconcile? Well, maybe. Marian hesitated, but then decided to ask her son the question. Do you want that to happen? Stephen shook his head negatively. I don't mind the younger ones seeing him if they want to. I'll see him too if I have to, but the rest is up to you. He's your father, she said, but I don't think I love him anymore, and I can't forgive him for what he did. You don't have to forgive him. As for our school, maybe we should talk to Robert now. Will he think of something? I'll try. You're the smartest. She hugged her son. Everything will be fine, he said. Tell your father I'm ready to talk to him. Let him call. Don't be afraid. I'll tell him, Stephen promised. A few days later, after Marian and Jacob had finished their morning routine, Robert came in. Ready, Jacob? The assistant asked. Where can I go? The chief replied calmly. Let's go. Are you coming too? Robert turned the last word to Marian. She was surprised. She is, of course, replied the ward calmly. I have a lot of documents to sign and some personal meetings. You could be needed at any time to change nappies or wipe armpits. I have to have some dignity. What if I have an attack at night? I don't want to suffocate in front of my business partners. As they drove to the business center where Jacob was supposed to do business, the manager explained. We don't know exactly how long this will take. You can sit in the restaurant. It's in the same building on the top floor. Just tell him to put it on Jacob's tab. Okay, Marian replied. If you need anything, Robert will call, Jacob added. At the restaurant, Marian ordered tea and tiramisu. She suddenly thought it was a great opportunity to meet Matthew. He was kind of in town. Marian didn't get out here very often, and there were things she needed to discuss with her husband. She called her husband, and he was willing to come over. What a place you picked, he said as he sat down at the table. You look like you've lost a little weight. But you haven't changed, just like you've lost a little weight. You look amazing, he said. Thank you, said Marian. You too. He shrugged embarrassedly. I'm glad you called me. Marian sighed. We should have talked a long time ago, at least to decide when to file for divorce. Matthew frowned. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. It's great that we're on the same page here. He moved over and placed his hand gently on her arm. Maybe we're being hasty, he said. Maybe we shouldn't get divorced. Should I not believe my ears? Marian interrogated. It was you who left me, wasn't it? You left a note and left without even saying goodbye to the kids. Didn't pick up the phone, didn't return messages. Just disappeared from our lives as if we were nothing to you and you hadn't lived with me for 15 years. Just came round one evening for tea. Matthew froze in embarrassment. I'm sorry, he said. I don't know what was wrong with me then. It was just some kind of madness. I was out of my mind. Marian sighed and released her hand to rub the bridge of her nose. Was that it? She asked. I won't ask how and how much you cheated on me and why you decided to break up. I've known about it for a long time, but why couldn't you talk to me properly? Why did you abandon the children? My husband lowered his eyes. I know, he said. It must have been a midlife crisis or something. It's just that at some point everything started to go crazy. Work, life, 3 kids. You're always with the kids and I'm in the background. I'm sick of the whole thing. And your new love? Young, fun, carefree, childless? She asked. Sort of, he replied. I lost my head then. I was afraid to tell you, even more so for the kids. What changed? She asked. Her husband moved closer. I've realized in these months how much I've missed you and the children, he said. And I want things to go back to the way they were. Marion shook her head slowly. Nothing has changed, she said. We'll get back together. In a couple of weeks you'll go off with another girl. No, I won't do that, Matthew assured her. Marion sighed. Jaroslav, she said. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I've realized that I can't forgive you. And my love for you has disappeared in that time too. I'm sorry, but I think we need to agree and decide when we go to file for divorce. Her husband's face suddenly changed. Marion suddenly saw clearly how his contrived tenderness and remorse came off. Then we must talk about the division of property, he said in a harsh tone. Marion was surprised at this abrupt change of subject. In fact, it amused her. Let's talk, she agreed. Your car goes to you. My flat goes to me and the kids. Matthew shook his head. No, let's sell it and split the money in half. Half. Marion smiled. I'm raising 3 kids on my own. Her husband was embarrassed, but he continued to stand his ground. I was paying her mortgage. And you didn't work? Sitting on my back? Yes, because I was taking care of the house and the 3 kids. And now I'm paying the mortgage. You left me out of the blue and didn't even help the kids. You can't imagine what I've been through these past few months. Well, then we'll get back together. The husband returned to the old topic. And we won't have to share the flat. Marion sighed. No, Matthew, I've already said everything. So you have her husband's voice suddenly lowered like a snake's hiss. And who will need you alone with 3 children? Do you think any man but me will look at you? You stupid pet chicken. All you know how to do is cook soup. Marion felt tears coming from her eyes. It hurt her to hear such words from the father of her children, from the man she had loved for so many years. Let's not play innocent, her husband continued. You yourself will come to me on your knees. She will not, said a familiar male voice behind her. She did not have time to see what happened next. Only Matthew suddenly flew across the restaurant and collapsed to the floor. Robert shook the hand that had just collided with her husband's jaw. That was harsh, but I guess it was understandable, Jacob commented. Marion looked up and saw the supervisor. He looked as pleased as a cat for some reason. And you're here? She asked in amazement. Everyone heard, he said rather dryly. Matthew rose slowly from the floor. He pressed his palm to his bloody lips. We'll talk to you again, he threw to Marion. Wow, Jacob said admiringly. I should get out of the office more often. This place is fun. Shall we go home? Robert asked Marion. We will, she answered quietly, wiping away her tears. She was sent to Camila's kitchen to drink tea and calm down. We have something to discuss with the boss, Robert said. You get some rest. I'll call you. But Marion had no appetite. She was replaying in her head what had happened in the restaurant. What's going to happen now? Will she be fired? Probably get fired. Jacob hardly needs a problem employee getting his assistant into fights in the middle of the business center. And what about the flat? Do we have to split it in half? Where will she and the kids live then? What if she has to find a new job, even if she doesn't get fired today? The school issue hasn't been canceled. With so many problems, Marion's head was spinning. Marion, let's go, she raised her head. Robert's face didn't make it clear what judgment she had been given, so she stood up and obediently walked with him into the chief's office. What a show you put on today, Marion, Jacob said cheerfully. I'm sorry, said Marion. I didn't know that was going to happen. Well, it was kind of funny, the chief said. We have other things on the agenda. Marion squirmed. Now he was going to tell her everything. Do you want to continue working here? Jacob asked. Are you firing me? Marion asked. Do you want to? No, she answered quickly. Then I'm not. Goody nodded. Soon your children will have to go to school. Yes, Marion confirmed cautiously. Jacob nodded. We'll get them a car and a driver, Robert said, to take them to school and bring them back. Marion opened her mouth. But why? She asked. Because I don't want to look for a new employee, the chief replied calmly. Thank you, Marion muttered. And we also need to solve the housing issue, Robert added. What about it? She wondered. Living in the outhouse in the winter is an option, Jacob said. It's warm and everything, but it's not very comfortable to run out in the cold for breakfast. So let's look at your new rooms. New rooms? Marion shook her head incredulously. There is an almost empty wing in the house, Robert explained. That's where we intend to put you. They left the study and went in the direction of rooms where Marion had never been before. What wing is this? She asked curiously. Jacob sighed. It's a part of my past, he said. I wanted to forget it, not remember it. But now I realize it's time to let go of the past and look to the future. They went into the largest room. This is the common room, said the chief. From here there are 4 bedrooms. There's enough for you. Marion walked around in surprise, looking round the rooms. Each room looked like a separate work of art. Beautiful, tastefully chosen furniture, paintings on the walls, everything is thought out to the smallest detail. Except it looked like it hadn't been used in years. I wonder why, Marion thought. Suddenly she saw under the white cloth the outline of an object from her childhood. A grand piano. Marion exclaimed in amazement. May I? She turned to Jacob. He shrugged his shoulders. Marion carefully removed the white cloth that covered the instrument and ran her fingers over the keys. The instrument was a little distressed, but it was quite playable. Marion sat down. And she began to play the only tune she could remember, the one her mother had played, and many, many times since she was a little girl. The first few notes were difficult, but then her hands remembered it, and her fingers flew over the keys with ease. She sat with her back to Jacob and didn't see the change in the old man's face. First he stretched it out in astonishment. Then he turned his head, as if he wanted to make sure his hearing wasn't deceiving him. Then a tear rolled out of his right eye, then another from his left. Robert walked quietly over to the piano and stood facing Marion. He looked at her, and then suddenly he looked at the chief and couldn't hold back his astonished cry. Jacob, what's the matter with you? Marion immediately stopped, turned round in amazement. The old man was sobbing unashamedly and wiping his face with his shirt sleeve. How do you know that tune? He asked. It was composed just for me. When Jacob was calmed down by the joint efforts of Marion and Robert, the chief asked for tea to be served to everyone. They returned to his office, and there the chief began his story. When I met Vivian, he began, I was still married to my 3rd wife. She and I hardly ever saw each other even then. We only met to discuss how we were going to divide the property. He sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Anyway, I was getting really tired of it. Work, divorce. One day I just walked out of a business meeting, let the driver go, and just went to the park, sat on a bench, and realized how nice it was. Just sunshine, birds singing, trees turning green. And then I saw her, Vivian. Marion froze. Her heart was beating very fast. She couldn't believe what was happening. So beautiful. I've never seen such a beautiful woman, Jacob said dreamily. And then she looked at me and smiled. And I knew I was lost. Marion saw Robert looking at her and smiling. When he noticed her gaze, he seemed confused and started to look at his boss, who seemed to be oblivious to his surroundings. He He was completely immersed in the memory of events that had taken place over 35 years ago. My feet led me to it, Jacob continued. And for the first time in my life, I was scared. I was so afraid she'd refuse to meet me. I'd been with a lot of women, but none of them had ever struck such awe in me. At first sight, to my delight, she said yes. He smiled blissfully. I've probably never been so happy. My wife and I were no longer living together. And so I brought Vivienne into this house and made this wing just for her. It's the sunniest side of the house. And the piano. She played for you? Yes, Marian interrupted him hoarsely. Vivienne taught music, and that tune you played she composed especially for me. Why did you break up? Marian asked. Another tear rolled down Jacob's face. A fool, because he said calmly. I wanted to marry Vivienne, and she refused me. Why? Marian asked. He sighed. Said we were from different worlds, that she didn't want to turn into just a rich businessman's wife and stay at home. That's how it is, muttered Marian. Yes, I persuaded her. I told her she could do whatever she wanted and be herself. She refused and ended our relationship first. Then why do you say it was your fault? Marian asked. Jacob sighed. Because I didn't insist. Because I gave in easily, because I didn't find out then that she was pregnant. Marian looked up at him. Jacob was looking straight at her. Yes, he said calmly. I'm sure you're my daughter. Marian stretched her legs blissfully and lifted her head, letting the sun shine on her face. She liked it here. The sea had always done her good, especially now that they got out there as a family every year. Mum, did you see it? Molly came running up to her. I swam the fastest. No, you didn't, shouted the middle son. It was obvious that he was tired and shutting down, but he was showing that he was inferior to his younger sister, who had been going swimming for 3 years and was performing well. He didn't mean to. I just gave in to you, Alex stated. Yeah, sure, the girl blurted out. She was already well aware of her own abilities and knew that her brother was swimming at full strength. Alex ran off resentfully towards the cabin. And you had to tease him, Marian gently reprimanded him. He wanted to compete. What am I supposed to do now? Go take a shower, we'll go to dinner soon. When her daughter ran away, she stretched, reluctantly got up from the sunbed and walked towards the cabin. She saw Stephen lying in the hammock, talking on the phone as usual. Talking to his girlfriend again, thought Marian. What's her name? It's either Jennifer or Ashley. He's all grown up now. In half an hour, she said to her son. And he nodded, showing that he had heard his mother's words. It was cool in the spacious cabin. Jacob and Robert were sitting in the living room playing chess, as usual. We're going home in 3 days, and you haven't even burned, Marian sighed. She gently ruffled her husband's hair and kissed her father on the cheek. Don't worry, Marian, he replied. We'll make it. How is the sea? The water is warm, replied Marian. How's the game? A draw, replied father with a sigh. After all, Robert adopts from me not only the nuances of managing the company, but also the ability to play chess. Robert smiled. I learned from the best, Jacob, he said to his father-in-law. Checkmate to you, by the way. Oh, you, Jacob cursed. Grandfather Molly appeared out of nowhere. What does that mean? She asked. Jacob coughed embarrassedly. It means, young lady, he said with feigned sternness, that you're not legally allowed to say that for another 8 years. We have worse swearing at school, Molly said, laughing and running off to the shower. Change schools, Jacob said firmly. I won't have my only granddaughter using that kind of language. Marian walked over to her father and kissed him on the top of his head. Then you'll have to change Grandpa, she said, because he's the one Molly hears it most often. That's a fair point, sighed her father. That's a fair point, Dad sighed. I'll try not to swear so much. Marian smiled and looked out to sea. Through the transparent panoramic wall of their cottage, she could see the huge red sun slipping into the sunset. "It's nice," she said, turning to Robert, who came over and hugged her from behind. "I always feel good with you," replied her husband. "Me too," said Marian. "And I'm perfectly happy."